Good morning, good morning, good morning. How's everybody doing? Happy Friday. And yeah, boop, boop, the men are up. Everything's up. Everything's up. Wonderful. Good to see you all. A little chilly today. A little bit of overcast, and the sun has taken a little bit of time getting up this morning. So we're getting close to that midpoint in the summer, aren't we? And then it starts getting shorter. Yeah, we know the cycle, especially when you have solar power. You pay close attention to the seasons in the sun. Wow, did you guys check out yesterday's episode last night with Greg Hill? It was pretty good. I'm getting a lot of good comments about it. A lot of people liked hearing about how he's fighting for us when it comes to our freedom to fly. So you can go check out freetofly.ca, and you can check him out next week in Calgary to do a meet and greet. If you didn't hear the story, Greg Hill is one of those pilots who stood up for us, wanted to make sure that we could still fly, wanted to make sure that we're safe. And he actually broke down some of the information yesterday about how unsafe Transport Canada has been when it comes to the regulations around COVID. I'll just give you the Coles notes. You can certainly watch the entire episode and get all the details. But the Coles notes is pilots are now able to self-assess their medicals, attest to them, just say, I feel fine, and you're good to go. As a pilot, it was drilled into us that, no, the medical is very important. You have to go see the doctor each 2 years, until 45, and then it's each year after that. So that's odd. That's odd. And they also changed, as we heard from Dr. Shoemaker on Tuesday, the pilot requirements for the EKGs have been changed 50% worse so that people can pass. So, yeah, I think we've heard some information around vaccine harm, hurting the heart, and hearts are important in pilots too. So we heard about that. What Greg did say, though, is he did highlight a little bit about that 1,500%, the 15 times death rate. He did identify the source of that and says it can be misunderstood information. But at the end of the day, he absolutely admits that there are injuries, vaccine injuries, and they have absolutely expanded the envelope. That would be a pilot term, expanding the envelope for the conditions to be able to fly. So the good news is he also emphasized that we're not falling out of the sky. Pilots are trained if there's a incapacitated co-pilot, and these planes don't fall out of the sky. So don't worry too much about that. We don't want to add a fear to flying. We just want to have the truth about what's going on behind the scenes. So thank you very much to Greg. And do tune in this afternoon where we have Chris Barber. He's going to be joining us talking about the trucking industry, how the mandates impacted the trucking industry. We know their response, but I want to get into more about the whys and then how they've recovered and if they've recovered fully or not. I'm trying to get into the information surrounding the big event that we're fully aware of. And also learn who he is. He's a very kind gentleman. He's got quite a sense of humor, and he's very, very nice. So we're going to spend some time with him. Today, we're going to be talking with Betty. It's all about Chris today. All about Chris. We're going to learn about him as the boy, as a young man, as the man, and then the man he's going to be. So we'll be spending today all about Chris. And the plan is next week will be Lysick, Tony, eventually Jerry. So what we're going to do is highlight each man and focus on them each week. And then Granny should be back on Monday. So today we don't have Granny. We're just going to be focusing on Betty. People need a break, have a weekend, regroup, get back to the fight because it's quite the fight. But today we're going to be focusing on Betty and Chris. And then after the first hour, we're going to have Danny Bulford joining us and Rick Abbott. So Rick Abbott is a police officer from Edmonton. Danny Bulford is the ex-RCMP officer who was working in Ottawa doing that event there. It was Danny who told Rick, hey, if you want to know what's really going on, head down to the events. So Rick did. He went down to Milk River. So I'm excited to put them both together, possibly for the first time since that event. And we can chat a bit about what they were going through, their stuff. And then we'll also do a big summary of the Coutts situation as it stands today. The idea there is to have a bit of a update for like half an hour that we can clip and share with people, because a lot of people are asking for quick updates. So if you don't want to watch 30 hours worth of information, hopefully this 30 minutes will hold you over. And then we'll get back to it next week. So I'm really excited to go ahead and bring in Betty. She's got her Diet Coke and she's ready to go.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Cheers to everyone.
Cheers. We need the coffee this morning.
The caffeine.
Have you always been a Diet Coke drinker, or is that something you picked up recently?
Oh, no. I've been drinking Diet Coke for years. Before that, it was just normal Coke. So
Okay.
a
And
long time.
Coke? Can we slip a Diet Pepsi in there, or you'll know right away?
Yeah, if it's a fountain Diet Pepsi, that's okay, but no, otherwise, no. No.
Really? They're that different? So fountain versus bottled or canned is that different?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
No. Hey, and good morning to James. James Sowery. Good morning, bud. Welcome this morning. He's here. So,
Good morning, James.
yeah, we love James. And
Mhm.
actually, that reminds me, James. Everybody get your James Sowery tumbler. You can get yourself a logo on there. You can have your son's name put on there. Get 10, hand them out. You can see the email in the bottom. And also remember, you can support the men on the GoFundMe. They got the bumper stickers from Granny Mackay and her website. And don't forget the Ride for Freedom poker rally that's coming up. You can hit that email address for more information. There we go. We got the important stuff out of the way there. Oh, and Save the Coutts Boys. Check out that website too. It's got some merch to help the men. Right?
Great.
Okay, cool. So thank you for joining me this morning. And I hope
You're
you're ready to
welcome.
just be one-on-one for the full hour. So I hope you have
Well,
a refill for that Diet Coke.
yeah, I've got a few. Yep.
Great.
Fridge full.
So Betty, how about we start before you made them? Who are you?
Who am I?
Yeah, so before Chris became a twinkle in your eye, you were Betty.
Mhm.
You
I
were walking this
was.
earth doing your thing. Why don't you tell us, a little bit about young Betty and becoming a mother Betty?
Okay. Well, yeah, I've always lived in Lethbridge, and I have never left. So, and I'm a North Side girl. Apparently, the wrong side of the tracks in Lethbridge.
How's the
At
north side?
least
I know
that.
west side and east side, but north side, how's that work?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. That's the tough side.
Okay, the wrong side of the tracks. So you had to
hmm
grow up on the tough side. That probably turned you into a
Yeah.
tough lady.
But we didn't know it was the bad side.
It was home.
It was. It was great growing up there. There really were no issues. So,
Mhm.
and I lived 2 blocks from the tracks.
So
Anyhow,
literally on the other side of the tracks.
hmm literally, yeah,
Yep. So
yeah.
your whole time you
So,
did school there and you grew up there?
yeah, grew up always in Lethbridge, and that's where I met my. Well, he's my ex-husband now, but still, he was uh, the father of my 3 boys.
Mhm.
And that I was a very, very shy child. So I had a very small group of friends, just very quiet. Um, I loved playing sports and
What
things
was
like
your
that.
sport?
I had a
You
few.
were basketball, right? You're gonna have to
Definitely
remember that.
basketball. Back in those days, it was basketball and baseball, volleyball, track
Very
and
active
field.
then.
Yeah, very. Yeah, track and field was probably where I excelled at as a child. And that.
Long
So,
distance or short?
uh, mm,
A lot of cross
a
country runners. I remember
combination
that.
of the two. Yeah, combination of the two. And that for a short girl, I had to run very fast.
You'd be
And
surprised. Those legs could go really
I
quickly.
know, right? Not anymore though. Darn. But
Any
yeah.
awards?
Well, in school itself, yeah, because like I said, I was really shy. So the schools were always approaching my parents to ask me to get into inter-school sports. I
Mhm.
just would not. I could not do it, and so no real technical awards. And yeah, so yeah, then I married when I was 18.
Oh, wow. So you married your
Right
high
out.
school sweetheart?
Yeah, yeah, married right out of high school.
Was he from the
And
North End too?
no, he was from the South Side.
See,
Yeah.
all best love stories happen that way, don't they? From the
Yeah.
opposite side of the
Oh,
tracks, the
oh.
bad girl.
There we go.
Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, so we got married when I was 18. He was only 19. And we just moved forward from there, had our 3 kids. unfortunately, the marriage didn't last. We were married for 13 years.
Okay. But
And
you had
then
3 wonderful boys.
yeah. So then that took me to having been a single mom and having to raise the 3 boys.
Yeah,
So I
my
went
mother
back to
had the same
school.
thing. There was
Yeah,
4 of us. Who was the first?
Chris,
Chris,
and,
followed
and
by?
then Curtis, my middle boy. He passed away in January,
Apologies for
and
that.
then Matthew, the youngest.
Yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting Matthew last week already? Holy smokes,
Yeah,
it's going by quick. Yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting him for a moment last week. So thank you for that introduction. All right, so we have Chris, Curtis, and Matt.
Mhm.
Then you went and became a single mother, which is
Single
tough, but
mom.
you clearly
So
did.
yeah, and so I went and I'm a recreation therapist by education. I went back to school so I could support the kids.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but then healthcare cutbacks came in, and so I lost my position. And then I started working for the city of Lethbridge in handy bus division.
Okay.
I actually loved it, and I had no desire to go back in direct therapy because, yeah, it was so different. Just at the end of the day, your day was over. So
Right.
I drove handy bus actually for the next 20 years after that, and then I retired. And along all that time, we had 8 grandchildren, so they've kept us busy too, and we totally enjoy that.
And you get to see all your 8 grandchildren all the time? Are they in the local area, or are they spread out like most
No,
families?
unfortunately, they're not. 2 of them do live here in Lethbridge,
Mhm.
and Chris's son was living in Lethbridge till he
He'll be
was
back.
incarcerated. Yep, he will.
Yeah, he'll be back. Yep.
Yeah, and then so I have 4 in Creston, BC.
Oh, wow. So that would
And
be Matt that has done that, or?
no, that's Curtis, my son that passed away.
Okay.
Those are his 4. Yeah,
Okay.
and then Chris's 2 are in Kelowna right now.
Wow. So you actually, so you produced 3, and then your kids did 4, 2, and 2. There may be more in the future too, right?
No,
No, you don't think so? Chris has one more?
no more. That's
No more?
enough.
That's it? 8 is
That's
good?
it. Yeah.
It's a lot of Christmas cards.
Yes, a lot of Christmas presents.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
And then now you're retired? What's the situation now?
I am. I'm retired. Was fortunate enough to be able to retire 11 years ago. And we've been traveling mostly just down south during the winter, but we have gone on other trips too.
Mhm.
And I should bring up who I call my husband. We're not technically married, but we have been together for 25 years, Daryl. And
Hi, Daryl.
so he's been here for everything, like all the grandchildren. He's Papa, and I'm all 3 of my boys think of him as their second dad.
Absolutely. And I didn't meet Daryl yet, but maybe I'll have dinner or something with him one day.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. So let's now rewind again. And now Chris is born. He's the oldest.
Yeah.
He's got 2 younger
Yeah.
brothers. I'm the oldest of 4. So I had 2 younger brothers and a younger sister. So I
Mhm.
kind of understand what he had to do. Being the oldest meant you also had to be responsible at a young age because
Yes.
you had people that would follow what you did who were younger.
Mhm.
So that meant he likely had to grow up slightly faster than his siblings just to be ahead of getting in trouble by being a demonstration to them.
Yeah. Oh, it wasn't. I don't think it was that too bad because they're
It
3
usually
years.
isn't.
Yeah,
3
3
years
years
apart?
between him and the second child, and 7 years between him and his
Oh,
youngest brother.
wow. Okay,
So
so yeah, that's a
yeah,
big gap.
that was
So
a big gap.
so he was more of a protector of them then because he was a bigger brother, an older brother, not just because
Yeah.
we were all a year apart. So we were all kind of
Oh
growing
yeah,
up together.
that's like my 4 grandchildren in Creston. They are 17, 16, 15, and 13 and a half. Yeah,
It's the same. There was a little bit of a break in the last one, but not a big break, just like
yeah,
us.
yeah. So
The women were built differently back then. They made all their children and got on with life.
got it over with. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So then he was a protective older brother. So he probably made sure that they were
He
safe.
yeah, he was good, a really good older brother, until they all became teenagers, and then they scrapped a lot more. Then differences of opinion and such, and that. But with him being the 7 years between him and my youngest, a 10-year-old and a 17-year-old don't have a lot in common in terms of
Right.
hanging out or anything like that.
You
But
don't really overlap with friends and stuff.
yeah, but yeah, but he was always a good brother, and still would he would do absolutely anything for anyone that he cares about, and that's definitely who he is. He would take a weekend away that was supposed to be a weekend away. He would stay in Lethbridge to help somebody if they needed it instead. So he's good like that.
Yeah, a couple stories I've heard. He was very willing to help. Like there was one
Yes.
story about 13 or 14 containers of chili. Somebody drove up to provide some food, and he was one of the first to go and assist and help without even. I don't even think he knew the people. He just helped. He was that kind of guy, or is that kind of guy. I'm going to talk about him in the past tense. He's
I know,
still
right?
is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
He still is
Yes.
that kind of guy.
Yes, he is. And yeah. And what else can I tell you with him? Chris has always been a big fan of hockey. He played hockey. He lived for hockey. And he was
Did that
really
start
good
early? Like in his early years?
Yep. When he was 6, he started, and they played all the way through every level. And he was a very good hockey player.
Which position did he prefer?
He was a forward.
Okay.
And he
Center?
had, let me think. Yes. Got to think
All
about the
right.
3 years.
So he's a bit of a leader then. So he would be helping with the plays and be the point man and stuff.
Yeah.
So natural leader then.
Yes, and that's the stuff that he loved. He was just like to be in sports and what have you. In school, I guess in some ways, I guess you could call it a leader, because Chris has also always been, he was quite popular in school. He had lots of friends and stuff, but one of the things he could not tolerate is people bullying other kids. He would be the first one in there to defend them and stop that type of behavior, because it just, it's not tolerable. And the same with anybody with any form of a disability, Like you don't pick on them. And a lot of that comes from our home too, because we have, or I used to take care of people with disabilities as a second job.
So you would foster people?
Yeah, well, I took care of them to give their families or caregivers breaks on weekends. And then it turned to doing it full time, just had them live with me. And and so they were around a lot with people with disabilities, and learned there's, more to the story about a lot of things, So, and Chris was one of them that was so good with these individuals. And and go ahead.
No, I was going to say I grew up in a similar environment where we were fostering children and young adults, and sometimes adults with disability, and they would range from mild to very severe, all the way to the point where you have to address seizures and emotional outbursts, and you're dealing with large people sometimes. Yeah, I grew up in that same environment. My mother's side of the family was very involved in foster caring for disabled, and we also had adults. What would boarders? They would be called boarders. People who would just come and stay with us for a while and have a place. And I think that exposure to people with vulnerabilities, even young age, really develops that empathy in you, because you learn very quickly, I am privileged to be able to not have these difficulties. And it's something I guess he took on really early.
For sure. Well, and you having said that, my parents also took in foster care children,
It
when
was a
they
thing
were
to do.
in their home and stuff. So yeah, that's how I grew up too, is having these individuals in our home. So yeah, it's just a kind of a carryover. So
Yeah, and when we got the news that we were pregnant with a child with Down syndrome, I believe it's my experience growing up around children with Down syndrome and other disabilities that took away any fear. The
it did.
state, Ontario, really tried to put a lot of fear into us,
Oh.
and we didn't, because I had that experience and I was able to provide my wife with comfort. That no, it's not going to be pain and torture for us. It's lovely people. If you ever meet somebody with Down syndrome, gentlest humans around,
Hmm.
big hearts. If
Yes.
you've had that experience, you will not be afraid of raising a child with Down syndrome. And proud to say, Jacob
And
is.
he's a great boy, I have to tell
Yeah,
you.
yeah. You met him. You met him, and
I
he's just full of
did.
hugs.
Yes, he made me smile. So it was
Yeah, it is
good.
dancing. He's just the cutest.
Yes.
Yeah,
All that
yeah.
pointing and yep,
He does it.
it was
And the
good.
theme song, to this show, he
Yes.
hears it, he'll come running over and he'll do his wiggles to it. Absolutely. And we were blessed that we have Jacob. And I do
Hmm.
believe if it wasn't for my upbringing, I may have made different decisions, because the state was being very compelled to make a different decision for us.
Yes.
So thank goodness
That's right. Thank
we
goodness.
love him.
It was meant to be. Yeah.
Yeah, he was meant to make you smile. Like, as soon as he
Mhm.
ran up to you, he was hugging all the strangers and men and
Yes.
women. He's in there.
Hmm. Yep. Yeah. Very
Great. So you had a
enjoyable.
similar experience. You grew up with people with
Hmm.
vulnerabilities, disabilities.
Yeah.
Probably taught you a lot of
Not
patience.
not necessarily vulnerabilities and vulnerabilities, yes, because they were, taken away from their parents for various reasons and stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, so you had to deal with a traumatized child a lot. So, but yeah, so I guess that was one of the reasons why I didn't go back into rec therapy, because that's driving handy bus. That's who
Hmm.
I drove one of the bigger buses to pick up people with disabilities to take them to all their um, daytime programs, and yeah, and I loved it. It was my cup of tea, so it was meant to be.
You got a bunch of big smiles, I'm sure, and
Oh yeah, all the time.
lots of hugs all the time too.
No, yeah, they are. It was a wonderful group of people. That's what I miss the most, is seeing them. Don't really miss
Right.
working, but I miss seeing them. Yeah.
Do you know of any of them? Have you stayed in contact, or at least hear about them in the community? Like, was there a couple
Oh
that you?
yeah. The I still did had people with disabilities live in my home up until a couple years ago.
Oh,
So
wow.
yeah, yeah, they were still living here when I retired and stuff and that. So yeah, and then not anymore, but the one in particular, because she was with us last. Yeah, we have great communication with her.
That's nice. That's
And
nice.
of course, I run into the others on the street type of thing, and of course, we had chats then. It's good.
Oh, very good. So that's the environment that Chris grew up in, a
That's where
home
he
where
grew
there's
up.
lots of, yeah, empathy and
Mhm.
sympathy and exposure
Yeah.
to all types of people.
Hmm.
Now,
Yeah.
what was his school days like? So he's now 5, going into kindergarten. He just grabbed his stuff and went, and he was ready to go, or was it you had to bring
Oh
him
no,
there and it was upset?
no, no, never. He was ready to go, um, until he was older. Then he didn't want to go to school. But when it's all started, kindergarten age and stuff, Chris was an incredibly bright young man, and so he kind of whizzed through the lower grades and stuff. He struggled more as he moved on, but mostly because he didn't try as hard.
Right, right.
Yeah, I had to be on him a lot more as he aged, because he would rather be outside playing street hockey or soccer or something than doing schoolwork. Yeah. So, and
But
then
when
when
he
he,
applied himself, he did well.
Oh yeah, he really well, really well. And that, so then, so he went through school. He actually didn't go in any school sports because he did play hockey and stuff when he was out of school. So he never did join those type of sports. And he was a busy young man, and he worked like in between to, you know, have some money to spend because I was a single mom.
Hmm.
And so they did the best they could to help out.
So what
And
was his first job? Paper boy or something else?
not a paper boy. I know my other son did paper boy. Oh, see, there we go. There's, I don't really remember what he did. And
Maybe lawn
that's,
care, shoveling snow.
yeah, yeah, that would be ironic because that's what he ended up doing
It would be
too. So
foreshadowing his future. Yeah.
maybe, yeah. But yeah, he, you know, I didn't want them to have anything where there were too many hours because I still wanted them to be kids.
Right.
And that, so just anything, you know, a little bit to help out here and there was great. And that, so it was good.
Now,
And
did
then
he find a? Go ahead. Sorry.
go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, did he find himself a high school sweetheart near the end of high school there?
Oh, yes, he had a high school sweetheart. Her name was Chris, Christine, actually. And that, she was great. Loved her. And they actually dated long after high school, but eventually, I guess, you know, it just
Ran his course.
ran its course in that. But yeah, yeah, he did. And pretty much that's who he stuck with for most of high school and then for a couple of years after too. So I don't really know him with anybody else until later. Then he dated on and off. He didn't have a lot of serious relationships until he went to Kelowna, and that's where
Hmm.
he met the mother of his two children.
Yeah,
And
Kelowna's a nice area for people who haven't been there. They do a lot of
oh,
wine. They make a lot of wine there.
yeah,
It's a nice place.
yeah, and I think
Did he
that's
move?
where
Did he move
like
to Kelowna for a bit?
yeah, he moved
Okay.
there for I think it was probably about 7 years, and that,
So
and
which
then
came first, the move or the woman? Like, did he move there for her, or did he find her when he
no,
moved there?
no, he found her when he moved. He had
Okay.
an opportunity to get a job there in some kind of construction. And
Okay.
that he went through a few years of not knowing what he wanted to do. He thought he wanted to be an insurance adjuster like his dad,
Hmm.
but it wasn't meant for him. So then he was just trying odds and off, you know, jobs, different jobs, and then he had an opportunity to go to Kelowna, so he did. Thankfully, because I have two great grandchildren because of that, and then he came home again, and that was great. And he started his fencing and landscaping business. And
Now, when he came home, he brought the kids with him too.
one,
One.
he brought his son home. At that time, him and his girlfriend had broke up,
Hmm.
and Chris got custody. And he was like 10 months old, so Chris had full custody from then. Then they did try to get back together, and they produced another child, but they didn't know she was going to be born until the mom had gone back to Kelowna. So the mom had the daughter, and Chris had the son.
Gotcha. So he went out there for work, met her, had a son, came back with the
Mm-hmm.
son, tried to regroup, had a daughter, and the daughter stayed on Kelowna, or did she eventually
Yeah.
come out as well?
No, no, she stayed in Kelowna.
Okay, she stayed with mom.
Yes, she stayed with mom,
Cool.
and that's
And
where Kyler is now with his
right,
mom and
right,
sister. Mm-hmm.
right. But the plan is the moment he's coming right back.
Yeah, I think he'll be going out the back doors of the jail and jumping in a car and heading straight for Kelowna. He might
You're
stop.
driving, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you're ready to go too. That gassed up, ready to go.
Yeah, he needs his son back.
Hmm.
That's all he thinks about day and night. He has to have Kyler back in his life. So yeah, that's where we'll head. Probably stop at the Dairy Queen first. He said that's the first thing he wants to eat.
Mhm.
Don't know why Dairy Queen, but that's what he wants.
Yeah, it's on his list. He's
Yeah.
been eyeballing that for a while, so he's going to get
Mm,
2. You can have
mm,
2.
okay. Yeah. And
Cool.
he said pizza for supper. So yeah, there you
Cool.
go.
Well, let's chat a bit about how he was building up his business. It ended up becoming an
Hmm.
award-winning one. I'm pretty excited to
Well,
hear how he did that.
it was odd. Like I never thought of him quite in that terms of doing landscaping and fence building. Well, what he did was put an ad out originally just to do snow removal.
Okay.
And so, and that went really well. We get a lot of snow here. And
Yeah.
then during the course of the winter, Chris looked into things and took a course on how to start a business, and looked into what he might want to do, and thought about fencing and looked up all the aspects of it, and that went from there. Oh, he started his business with $2,000. That's what he had to work with. And holy crow, I'm so proud of that boy, that man. He,
Yeah.
yeah, he, in a very short period of time, that business grew tremendously. And I think it was the first, not would be the second year, Lethbridge, they look for businesses of distinction and stuff. And Chris won it. Like he's got his little plaques for the wall and stuff.
Hmm.
When we cleaned out his office, we saved them, needless to say. And so he got those 3 or 4 years in a row, a different one like that.
Really? So he's
Because
consistent with it.
oh yeah, totally. And his reviews, well, I don't know now because he probably hasn't got back to people in a couple of years here, but his
He's
reviews,
preoccupied.
all of them were good. You never saw anything negative. You really didn't. They just tremendous. He works with people so well. He's definitely a people person, and he was very fussy. Like his employees, they had to do the job right. Or he would redo it. That's it. Like he had a certain standard that had to be, met, and he made sure that his employees followed that. So, yeah,
Well, that's how,
and oh yeah, it was incredible. And then pretty soon he just kept expanding to the point like he had a huge bay that to have all his stuff in, and he right at the end there he owed for nothing. Like he
hmm
bought all his equipment and his skid steers and his trucks and whatever you need to to landscape and build fences. Fencing was his big thing.
hmm
And and he had 9 employees.
Wow.
Yeah, gone from 2 to 9. And so needless to say, they're all, well, they probably have other jobs, but they were unemployed because of
Yeah.
this. And yeah,
Were,
so
were were they unemployed due to COVID mandates or because he's
no, because Chris, yes, that's because
okay?
Chris is incarcerated. Because that was the good thing about his job too. He could still work because everything was outside.
Okay, so he was deemed not necessarily essential, but not high risk because you're outside.
That's right. Yeah. So it didn't stop him. So
Well, I guess the
yeah.
rich people do need their landscaping, so that will be
Mhm.
added to the list of things to get done, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so for him and his employees, that was a God blessing because other people didn't have that option. They were not
Yeah.
working.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. He is very lucky like that. So within a short period of time, that business that he built on $2,000 was extremely successful. And of course, that's just one more thing that he's lost by
Yeah.
being incarcerated. And that was a little hard to take, so he has
So
to start all
how did
over.
how did he unwind that? Because it was sudden for him to find the situation he's in. So he called you, called the employees. did they try and run it for a bit because we're not sure if he's coming home soon or not?
No, because of the arrest was in February, the landscaping end of things, it wasn't
off season.
They're off season. He did have 2 guys still that were doing the snow removal. So they were able to stay on until there was no snow. So
Right.
he did employ those guys. And then after that, we were hopeful he would be out by spring, but he wasn't. So then, everybody so we did keep his shop for several months, doing the best we could to pay for it and the expenses to run it. And then when it was pretty clear that he wasn't getting out, we had to give notice. So Daryl and I and a couple of Chris's friends and his brother and that had to load up that shop and, we're fortunate because we had to sell some of Chris's stuff to pay for expenses, but he still has a lot that when he gets out, we have it all stored on my sister's farm. So when he gets out, if he chooses to go back into that business, he will have a good start. And,
say hi to Daryl for us.
Hi, Daryl. Yeah, he's just getting up. Yeah.
Good morning, Daryl. So great. So everything's at your sister. Well, not everything. You had to sell a bunch, but enough to get restarted is at your sister's.
Yes. So we'll see what happens with that. And if he chooses to go a different direction, then needless to say, we'll sell everything and help him get started in another direction.
Yeah, that's the conversation I've had with him.
Pastor.
The pastor, you said, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And
so it's a lot to think about. He's just, one day, one step at a time. So
now his faith, was that something that you knew about before he went in there? Because I think he told me a story about 2016 is when he really started to discover that. Yeah.
It was before he went in there, but surprisingly enough, being in there has only intensified it. And I'm really grateful for that because it's his faith that has helped him get through it.
And it's also helped him connect with people and share it and follow that journey a bit more. His stories with me was prior to going in, he hadn't read the Bible. But now that he's been in there, he has a favorite version. I think he said the Old Testament. I think it might have been the New Testament, but he has a favorite version right now, and he's been spreading that gospel for a while now. And he's got the record for the longest Bible study in this Lethbridge, right?
Yes, but I was really impressed with that at first. But now that he's been in there a year and a half, and I think he's the only person that's been in there that long, everybody's come and gone, eh? So I'm still impressed that he's doing it, but it's probably easy to be the longest running one now because nobody should have been incarcerated that long in remand. So but
that is. No, I was going to say that is the bittersweet part of this. He absolutely has done a great job, but because he's been forced to in a way that shouldn't have happened. And Betty, because of this, there's a good chance that he'll maintain that record forever because nobody else should go through this again.
I there won't be. Not. Yeah, nobody should have to. And that's and that brings me to one of the things that amazes me because of what he has seen while he has been in there has made it so he wants to try and help make a difference in what's happening when he does get out. Kind of a mission for him and I, because there's so many people that go in and out that perhaps if they got the right treatment and care while they were there and not left to go back out onto the streets or to the environment that got them to where they are, perhaps they would have a better chance at a good life. And when Chris is in there seeing the same people come in, that he says they're good people that have a problem that they need help with. and the resources just aren't there. You shouldn't be going to jail and then just right back out to the streets. For those who want the help anyhow, there should be a better option. And so that's one of his missions for when he gets out. And he's known that that's how I have felt for a long, long time. I already started working on it before Chris was incarcerated. And that,
really?
So, yeah, because it's how I feel too. There's, so I've been to, city council meetings and stuff, trying to, make some changes, give them some ideas that I think are approachable. No, hasn't been very successful, but, I keep hoping that one day, they might listen and something could change. So, but anyhow, it'll be good.
So before he was incarcerated, you were actually advocating for the conditions in the remand center?
Yes.
So
yes.
what got you involved in that? That's amazing. So what got you involved in that before he was involved in it?
Well, I don't know if you know this though. My middle boy that passed away, he was a drug addict.
Sorry, I did not know.
You wouldn't know, and that's okay. That he was what he was. A great guy, to be honest. He had the personality. Yeah, you would never have thought of him as being that type of person, because he would just, he was great. So anyhow, because of that, he was getting himself into trouble, and he would go in there into incarcerated, be sober, so to speak, when he gets out, and nowhere to go. Like, he could come to my house for a certain amount of time, but with them being like that, they drift off, because he would always be on a list for treatment. He'd be 136th on the list, and it never happened. Not once was he able to actually get into the treatment center in time.
Okay. So that's the reason.
So I've been working on it because for those reasons. So, and now Chris and I are going to work on it together, because he even experienced more of what was happening firsthand, So, yeah.
Wow, so that could be the path that you were on. That could be God's plan. Expose that, make you see it. So maybe you've been chosen to be the one that does make some change.
Yeah, I hope so, because something does have to change, because I don't want to see this happen to anybody else's child because of lack of resources
and services. So maybe the services themselves are lacking, and they need to be developed or improved upon. It may require some more resources, but
yes, and especially around Lethbridge, because we're well known for the homeless population, and that's so we definitely need resources. They need them everywhere, but Lethbridge for its size, and that we're well known for having issues. So.
I would say I didn't know how bad it was. I grew up in Winnipeg for a while, so I saw homelessness there, and it wasn't this bad. I grew up in Toronto, saw it there as well. Like my adult years were over there. But going to Lethbridge was a bit of a surprise to me, because this is the first time I saw fentanyl-related anything, like physically seeing it. And my goodness, there's people struggling out there, like all over the place.
Yes.
But nobody's there helping. People just walk past. That seems to be the norm when I was walking from the court to the hotel I was staying at. Is that a recent thing, or has it always been like that?
As far back now as I can remember, pretty much in Lethbridge. It has gotten way worse since fentanyl. It's very addictive. So very addictive. So and way less money. So that's the drug of choice, right?
As I pulled in and set up at the hotel first night, just getting myself situated, I was on the phone with Danielle and Granny or something like that, and they're telling me, by the way, don't leave anything in your car. Make sure it's locked. They will break into it. I'm like, what? And then they're telling me it's the drug capital of Alberta, possibly Canada. Well, Vancouver's in the running there.
Right.
And the crime was really high. I'm like,
Mhm.
what? I didn't know this. I thought, city
Oh,
crime,
yeah.
sure, but not that bad.
Yeah, and your hotel is only 2 blocks from where they all congregate too. So, yeah. And
Yeah,
that,
I
but
didn't know that.
they're still great people. Like there's a lot
We
of
had
good
no problems.
people.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
yeah, we
good.
had no problems.
I know a lot of people, and I understandably don't like being around those individuals and stuff because you don't know who you can trust or can't trust, eh? But
Hmm.
when it gets right down to it, they're all just human beings. I have, well, I go down to the shelter area, and you, of course, you're going to get approached and stuff. There's also a soup kitchen down there, and so if you want to help out there or donate or anything, so you have to go down in that area. And but they're all great, they're human beings that need to be talked to with some respect too. That I'm pretty sure none of them grew up saying, "Hey, when I grow up, I want to be a drug addict and live on the street."
Correct.
So it just I just take it as it comes, and they're just other human beings, and if we can just remember that it's probably not a choice they have made, and it's not an easy decision or an easy act to get out of it. So it's, yeah.
How do
So
you
I
think?
think go ahead.
How do you think we could help? Like policy change, new types of services, a lot more mental health care. What do you think is some of the
Mhm.
solutions here?
Yeah, well, for one, I I don't. They need to give these individuals, especially the ones that end up incarcerated, the opportunity to go direct into a treatment center. I mean, direct. Don't say in a day or two or anything. You leave the jail and go right to one of these treatment centers if they want to go. And trust me, a really good percentage do. Doesn't mean they'll be successful, but they get the opportunity to try. And if you get just one or two of these people's lives changed, each time that they're let out, um, that'll make a big difference. And what else they need are more treatment centers, and that
So,
is.
do you believe it's more of a disease, not a choice? It's something that they need help with. It's not a decision. Is that where you're at with this, or do you believe that
It is
they
a
can easily stop?
disease, because I think anybody who tries it, I think everybody knows that, hey, I could get addicted to this, but I think they also believe that they're going to be the exception,
Okay,
because I know of a lot of people who were very successful in their lives that became drug addicts and totally lost everything. And what does that say? You know? So yeah, it's hard. It's something hard, but they need more facilities in the right cities too, where they're needed more. And um, the problem was people are always fighting it because nobody wants it in their neighborhood.
right.
So that puts a new spin on a lot of things. So, and it can't be out of town either, because these individuals have to access things that you can only access if you're in town, some extra meetings or whatever needs to be done, right? So it does, I guess, unfortunately, have to be in the city, and
Hmm.
that's or close to, so they can still catch a bus or whatever to do extra things. That's for the long term. Of course, in the beginning, you wouldn't be leaving at all to get the proper treatment and stuff. You'd be in there day and night. So, yeah.
And how about the faith community? Are they assisting? Do they need to grow? How's the faith community
In regards to
helping
the,
people?
oh, it's great. It's great. But what little things that people don't realize, and I'll give you an example, is after my brother's funeral, there was so much food left, and there was a caterer, and I says, well, let's donate it to the soup kitchen. And everybody said, no, they can't take this. I said, yes, they can if they know where it's coming from and that. So I phoned right in front of these individuals, and they were so excited. So my point, I guess, being is if people knew more about that, like after another funeral, another wedding, whatever, and there's extra food and stuff, there's some place where that can be used, because these food banks that are trying to help these individuals just don't have the resources. So there's lots. There's the food banks, the soup kitchen, many of them. Lots of the churches reach out to help out in any way they can. There's fundraiser donations of food and such. So yeah, there is a lot of people reaching out, but they can always use more.
For sure.
Yeah.
For fundraising, for care, offering some assistance.
Or just as an individual, just a bag of food, and take it over there. So anything helps, everything and anything. So it's good.
Now, you mentioned you've gone to town council or city council, I guess, a few times. What are your efforts like that? Are you trying to implement change? Are you trying to collect information? Are you trying to just add pressure for them to do something? What's the kind of interactions you've been having?
Well, probably a little bit of both.
All of them? Okay.
Yeah, all of it. Yeah, because you want to hear what they are doing, because they had an evening or a whole day of this that people could come to, and they were going to tell you what their plan of action was, and listen to you with anything that you thought could be something they could use.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, I just find that it's all lip service. Intentions are good, but nothing ever becomes of it. Although I did hear that there is a new building going to be constructed here in Lethbridge. I think there's 3 or 4 of them throughout Alberta for people, individuals like we've been talking about. So hopefully that's sooner than later. And then so you just come up with ideas at your own of how it would work. Everybody has a thought on what would be an option, but honestly, they also were opening another center, and they decided not to do it because they had pressure on the neighborhood people. So it's probably been hard for them, but not near as hard as it is on these individuals. Right? So
and you're still active.
Pardon me?
Sorry, I said, and you're still active now. Like, you're still doing stuff now? Is there
to be honest, I haven't been doing anything. This stuff with Chris just seems to fill all my time and energy, and yeah, I haven't done it. That's why I say when Chris gets out, we've talked about it. That's going to be one of his and my focus together, right? Yeah.
So Dairy Queen, Kelowna, change the world. That's the plan.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. Yeah.
Sounds like fill him up first, get that embrace going, and then he's ready to go. He's good to go.
Yeah, I think. Okay, sounds good. Yeah.
That sounds good. And it looks like you turned into an entrepreneur with that business of his. Whether he meant to or not, it seems like he is a type of guy who can build things, big things, even communities.
Yeah, I think so. What has happened? He says that he doesn't have to like it, but he figures this has happened for a reason, and hopefully something good comes out of it.
It sounds like it's materializing this good thing. He's a witness to what's going on in there. He's going to come out and be an advocate for it. Just like Donald, when we hear him talk about his 63 days and the conditions and the mental health, he was well aware of what was going on in there. And because of that, look what happened with Donald. He's now out there advocating, spreading the word, and changing things.
Yeah, I am so grateful to him and to everybody. There's so many out there now, and I'm very pleased, very thankful, because in the beginning there was nobody. So
Yeah, there's a family that's come together. And just like all families, it could be rough at times, but family has come together with the focus, and we're looking towards that big day, right?
Yes, we are. And I believe it's going to happen.
I believe it's going to happen. Do you believe you'll have them back for Christmas?
I hope so.
The prayers are out there.
They are. That would be wonderful. I'm hoping for October. So,
oh, wow. Yeah. What will happen in October? Is there a way to get back there sooner?
Well, I'm hoping it might even be sooner, but October, I believe for sure in October, he has another bail hearing.
Okay. I didn't know about that. So October, Chris Carbert has a bail hearing.
Yeah, unless they can get it sooner. He wants it sooner, but so far the courts can't oblige. So
that's frustrating.
It is.
No, they're saying they're fully booked. That's why they're saying all days are taken.
Well, because it has to be a certain judge, and so
it has to be the first judge that denied it.
Yes, yeah. So until she's available and the lawyer's available and the Crown's available, that's the date. But they're thinking of other ways of doing it. So we'll see what happens here.
All right. So other ways, some sort of like an emergency injunction or a motion or.
Well, no, it'll be more like maybe they don't need a whole, like a half day. Maybe they could start earlier in the morning, like at 8 instead of later, and end it sooner so that it doesn't take up the majority of a judge's day. And, or the Crown's, and then they can still fit in other things. So.
Well, that's optimistic.
Yeah.
Do you know if the other men are also having one, or is Chris kind of just going to see if it works and then maybe the rest will follow?
Yeah, I believe Chris is the only one. I think the others, well, if Chris gets out, that's good news for them too, right?
Right. You would think, boom, it's the same for everybody.
Yeah. And it doesn't change anything for Chris. He can still go for another one if, hopefully that magic envelope is open before then, and that'll help things.
Yeah, for sure. That's where we left off on Thursday, was all the arguments are in now from both sides, Crown and defense, on that application, that CC1. And the judge is reserving his decision. Yep. I'm hoping even that decision can come before October, because if that decision comes, it could change the need for anything else. That's
right. And so, yeah, that's what I'm hoping for too. And because I don't think they'll need a bail hearing after that's opened. So
yeah, so you're with the defense on that one. You believe that this could end the case.
I'm not too sure it'll end the case, but it will probably end their incarceration. And that for their, because of their reasonings for keeping them in there. So I don't know what it is, but that's what I'm speculating.
Right, and that's all we have, because everybody's tight-lipped on it.
Yeah, and I don't believe for a second that the Crown or the powers that be will let it just be over. So I'd be grateful for one step at a time. So we'll see. So everybody, keep praying and keep your fingers crossed.
Ultimately, do you want them just released, or do you actually want a trial to get the evidence and show the innocence? What would be your ideal path to the conclusion of this? I don't think it'd be the Jordan decision, because you'd want to get it before then. I don't think right. I think you do want a trial.
Well, the problem with the Jordan too is that they still being accused of these crimes and never vindicated. And how does that
public opinion won't change. I think public opinion would get worse.
Exactly. I want everybody to see that these guys were innocent. They're innocent, and in such a way that you can't even argue it anymore.
I hear you, because
there's always going to be people, no matter what they see, they're going to believe what they want. But
okay.
I also think the majority, once they're really showing the truth, what can you argue about it anymore? So we'll see what happens anyhow. So that's my idea, is that you need them totally vindicated to be able to move on in life.
Now, that could happen with the opening of that envelope, because the content of that later will become known after everything's done.
Mm-hmm.
So
Exactly.
that might be enough to show, because again, we have to prove innocence here. This is not innocent until proven guilty. You absolutely have to prove innocence here.
Right.
So it's possible that envelope does it. It's possible a trial does it. It'd be difficult if things were stayed and withdrawn without information, and it'd be difficult if Jordan kicks in, because then it's going to be the public opinion that you'll have to be fighting after that.
Yes, exactly. All the time. And how that could possibly affect all their lives, I don't know.
Well, I think we'll be doing this battle for quite some time, that battle of public opinion. I think that's going to be one that's going to be tackled for quite some time. Even if a trial, they're found completely innocent. Like you said, there's still going to be people that won't believe it. And I don't think this particular government and media is interested in telling that story. So either it's going to be ignored, or they may even twist it. We'll see. But
I don't think it'll be over when it's over.
Right.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to go ahead and bring in some guests. I got 3 guests to bring in, and you're more than welcome to stick around, because what we're going to be doing is talking about the entire Coutts situation, but summarize it so that a couple people can understand and catch up. So we've got Donald. You're very familiar with him. Hey, Donald, buddy, how you doing?
Hi,
Good morning.
Good morning. And we have a new friend, Danny Bulford. Hello, Danny. Nice to meet you.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Hi.
Thank you for coming on. And we're welcoming back Mr. Abbott. Hey, Rick, how you doing?
Good morning. Good.
Good morning. Hey, where did we find you now? Are you still at that camp thing, or what are you doing now?
No, I'm on summer holidays.
Oh, you're giving up
some kids around.
You're giving up some of your summer holidays for us this morning.
You bet.
They still sleeping?
Oh yeah.
That's how we can get away with it.
We're good.
Very good, very good. That's how we can get away with these. They can sneak people away while their kids are still sleeping.
Yeah, for sure.
It works. Good morning, Rick. And hey, Donald, good morning. Thank you for making it. You let us know that you had an accident, so you had to deal with that.
Well, I did. And as long as I don't breathe too deeply or do much of anything, I'm okay. Great standing here at my desk. I busted up a couple of ribs, but
sorry about that.
I'm here.
How's the other guy look? A lot worse?
The other guy's my grandson's baseball on the living room floor. Yeah.
Oh, I think you fell onto
in the middle
ball.
of the night. Yeah. So,
yeah. If it's not Lego, it's a baseball. Sorry about that.
That's it. Very strategic. He's going to be a very strategic man when he grows up. Yes.
Oh my goodness. Sorry about that, Donald. You'll get better.
Yeah.
And hello, Danny. Nice to meet you. Do you want to? We've had Rick on. We've had Donald on. Do you want to kind of introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. I'm Danny Bulford. I was an RCMP officer for 15 years. I spent almost 7 years in the Yukon doing general duty policing. And then I spent the last 8 years of my career in Ottawa as a full-time sniper observer on the emergency response team. And, the thing that kind of adds a little bit of a dramatic flair to my story is that before I was speaking out against COVID mandates, I was regularly involved in protection of Prime Minister Trudeau. So that's a summary of my backstory. And then in fall of 2021, I was a public spokesperson for a group of Mounties opposing the federal government mandates, trying to appeal to people about why people were, let's quote unquote, vaccine hesitant. Mm-hmm. And then that led to, understanding that not just the vaccination, but many of the mandates were completely unjustified, unscientific, no evidence supporting them whatsoever, and completely opposite of what the federal and provincial government pandemic plans were. And then, of course, I was involved in the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa, Ontario.
And that's kind of how we heard about Rick as well, because you gave Rick some advice to go check out Milk River.
That's right. Yeah, I talked to Rick, and I knew that, you know, not to sound boastful, but Ottawa had people like me there that could kind of help people navigate, like how the police kind of operate in situations such as Ottawa, even though that was on a scale like I had never seen before. But I was familiar with the area, like intimately familiar with the downtown core of Ottawa and a lot of the tactics that we might be looking at. And so I just said, you know, that the people in Alberta probably could use some help.
Yeah. And then Rick, you spoke to him, and he said, "Hey, you may want to go take a look at this in person if you want the truth." Want to take us through that a little bit and take us how you got to Milk River?
Yeah, sure. I was seeing it happen, I think, like every other Canadian, where the mainstream media was making it out to be a bunch of, for lack of a better word, terrorists down at Milk River and Ottawa. And then I had access to some independent sources, much like yours, Jason, who were essentially saying that it was just Canadians, our neighbors down there, protesting lawfully and peacefully the mandates. And I was confused, I think, like everybody else. And I wanted to see the truth. And when Danny told me to, he put it in simple words. He says, "Don't believe me. Go see for yourself who's down there." And that's what I found. I found in Milk River, there was simply our neighbors, Canadians of all walks of life. I've been wanting to get this term in for a while. I bet you guys will recognize this. There was a fellow that said a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. Those Canadians were in Milk River. So Danny nailed it. It took me 2 minutes to figure out that it was our neighbors down there. So that's what got me, that's what brought me to the end of my career, though, for visiting that.
Yeah. If you want to quickly tell people about that, because they may not have seen your previous episode, but you lost your career over this.
Yeah, I spoke for 3 minutes, I think, encouraging a crowd of people who were in Milk River to remain peaceful. They were being peaceful, and I just encouraged them, saying, as long as you remain this way, your message will be heard, and you're lawfully placed there. Somebody in the crowd had videotaped me doing it, as would happen, I think, nowadays with everybody having a phone. Posted on their personal Facebook page, I think it was. And when it got back to my executive officer team with the Edmonton Police Service, had embarrassed essentially the EPS, and I was suspended without pay immediately. My unions admitted that there's nothing they could do for me, that the chief could keep me off suspended for indefinitely. So I used the term tongue-in-cheek. I say I was essentially fired. They bled me out. I was pushed out of the EPS with no hope from either the union or the police service to even have a hearing. To this day, no one from the police service has asked what my role was down there. They just suspended me, and here I am today. Wouldn't change it, by the way.
Yeah, you're in a great place right now. Bright and early, kids asleep, and you're enjoying your vacation, so don't change a thing. I heard from Greg Hill yesterday. So he's a pilot for a major airline. Same story. The unions were not being unions, and they were absolutely toting the government messaging on that one. So you saw that with the police services union in Edmonton. We see it with the pilots union, and tomorrow I'll be talking to Chris Barber about the truckers unions that also did the same thing. Donald, you've been paying attention, and you were a copper in Toronto. By the way, we have like 3 cops here. That's pretty cool. Or ex-cops. And you saw how this worked. Now, was your union, do you think you'd be able to count on your union today? I'm just going to talk about union for a second, then we'll get back to the rest of the stuff.
Okay, police unions all across Canada abandoned their membership during the COVID period.
All of them.
I can't think of one that stood up to the jabs. I might be wrong, but none of the ones that I know did. And they
Or no
just,
press about it, at least.
Say again?
And no press about it, at least. So maybe there was one, but we never heard about it.
No, the press that you heard was that the union had agreed that the members had to be jabbed or tested every day or whatever it was going to be. Either one is is very invasive medical procedure. They just sided with big pharma and with the government, and they did that without consultation really with their members. And what can I say? It's the same with unions in everything, transportation, the airlines, everything. It just shows that everything's been captured. That's my opinion. The police unions used to be, decades ago, I think, a little more concerned about the health and welfare of individuals on the job. Now it seems to be mostly just big movements and big thoughts, but seldom, when a police officer needs assistance, do they get the full support of the union as they used to 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, it used to be an advocacy thing where we would advocate for people, but now it seems very political, where they're more politically aligned and function like a political operation than anything else. Would you agree with that, Donald?
Sure. I mean, we have right here 3 ex-cops who are guilty of wrong thinking. Wrong think. You thought bad thoughts, gentlemen. So the unions abandoned you.
That's quite the point. Absolutely. And then Danny, so we've been talking with somebody. We have a mutual friend who's been trying to find time for you to be on my interview show. Hopefully we can find some time in August or something like that for you on that. But they also mentioned that you were interested in getting some more information. Now, you were out in Ottawa for all of this, and probably like many Canadians, and just like Rick, I forgot about this. We forgot about this for quite some time until like the last month and a half. This come back up. Let's start with what you know, and then we can certainly get into recapping and providing you a big summary of the Coutts situation.
Well, I mean, all I really know is what has been published in mainstream media, and then the little snippets that I've seen in recent days from independent sources like yourself. And so, of course, I don't trust anything that I read in the mainstream media. But it's some of the only publicly available information. And I think reading what Donald has written, I think I definitely agree with his assessment that he documented in his most recent article about there being like, the staging of the photograph being used as like kind of quasi propaganda for like get the public evidence out there of the danger that existed to justify the invocation of the Emergencies Act. The, influencing public opinion seems to be more important than real evidence and investigation nowadays. And then it's all, also a scare tactic for any other protesters or any kind of dissident, right? Like similar to what happened in Ottawa with the freezing of the bank accounts, that really scattered a lot of people and really made people terrified about like, well, what can we do if they're just going to switch off our ability to transact with the world? So, but I also know, I mean, I'm a little bit guilty. Maybe it's because of my, years of conditioning and my faith that I had in the police, or not so much police management, but like in frontline members. When I saw the initial reporting coming out of Southern Alberta, and I mean, that was during the convoy in Ottawa, my initial reaction was like, oh, someone took the bait. Because I had received information myself on the night of February 13th. A trusted friend who I would trust my life to, and I believe is a very reliable source, had contacted me and said that they had received information from someone within the federal government had contacted them to tell them that there was a plot brewing to plant weapons in or around the convoy in Ottawa to try and discredit the convoy. And I knew that that was like right at the same time that there was like a lot of press being delivered in the Peterborough, Ontario area where 2,000 firearms had allegedly been stolen from a tractor trailer unit in Peterborough. And this was, and then, so that combined with the phone call that I got, combined with the very first question, like right in around that time period, that the mainstream media asked Tamara Leach and Brian Peckford after a joint press conference in Ottawa, was about the possibility of weapons being at the convoy. And I was like, okay, all of these things are starting to line up to me to what I suspect may be like an undercover play, like set up a scenario, and then they'll put undercover operators into the convoy to try and see what kind of sentiment there is within the protest groups, you know, and maybe try and target some of the people that they might think might be a little bit more likely to hook into the idea of, you know, procuring stolen firearms, for example.
Right. Yeah.
And so, you know, I talked to some other people that I really trust as experienced investigators, kind of got their take, and we all agreed, like, okay, we need to get ahead of this. And so we put out, I immediately started contacting all of the Ottawa all of the police liaisons I was in contact with, you know, trying to get ahead of that curve and say, look, this is the information I'm getting, so this is what we're on the lookout for as protesters here at the convoy. We're looking for people who may try and plant firearms or any kind of weapons. And then I got the truck operations people to start pumping out like a mass, like a push text to all of the convoy participants. And then we released a video where I was kind of giving this public warning that this is the information that we received, and please remain vigilant and keep your eyes open for any kind of suspicious activity. Whether that was actually effective in preventing something from happening in Ottawa or not, we don't know. But it's the very next day, or right around the time that was right around the time that the arrests began and the raids began in Alberta. And my initial reaction was, oh no, someone took the bait.
Right.
And so I just, you know, but I'm hesitant to ever like really give what I feel is like a definitive opinion on what's the likely scenario until I've seen what evidence is being presented against the accused. And so I guess I kind of, you know, shamefully, I wasn't following it as close as I should have, because like my life went for a dumpster fire, and me and my family were just trying to find out, okay, we need to find a new home. We need to rebuild a whole new life. And like, I need to start over. And so that's where my focus was, like the last year at least. But you know, the recent activity, you know, I mean, I had heard like people talking about things about, you know, how they had been set up. And so I'm trying to keep an open mind, but not jump right on without knowing the whole story. And I guess what I am looking for is like, what is a summary of like, what do the families and the supporters think happened? You know, I mean, you know, obviously you can't jeopardize their defense or the publication ban, but like, what's the general vibe about what's happening out there? And sorry, I wrote a couple. And
well, we can ask Betty to kind of give us a quick little summary.
Is it true? Is it true that one of the accused was offered a settlement? Because I saw something like that circulating on social media. And I mean, I don't know what is true anymore.
Okay. Well, I can talk to that one only for one of the men, and that would be Chris Lysick, who told me himself. So my source is Chris Lysick himself. He told me that the Crown asked what he wants as an offer. His lawyers said, drop all charges and we don't sue you for wrongful imprisonment. No deal. That's all I know. That came directly from Chris Lysick. I can't speak for any of the other men on whether or not they got an offer like that.
Okay.
Okay. Now, Betty, can we maybe answer some of his questions? Because I don't want to speak for you or the rest of the family, but you can speak for you. And his question was, what is your sentiment of what you think happened? You have more information than we do. You speak to Chris, and I don't want to get into the way of defense at all. So whatever you want to say is fine.
what I think happened is they were looking for subjects that could easily, they felt that they could easily sway to what they wanted them to say. It's so hard for me to explain this. I think they were female under cops, and they did what probably they were told to do, and doing some flirting and trying to, get things out of these guys that, things that they wanted to hear. And I think probably at least one of the men were, who was single at the time, was falling for this, and they were putting words in their mouths, and even though nobody agreed with them, if they even smiled, they thought they were taking it as a yes, because nothing in the disclosures say that they actually admitted they never did find what they claimed were coming in. So I think it was just a total setup, and it was just these particular men were easy targets for they're very outgoing men, so they would just be talking to anybody. So I think that's why they were the targets.
Okay. So Betty thinks a bit of a setup, and they were almost entrapped, possibly. That might be the word that could be used here.
Yes.
As a supporter, and as somebody who's been talking to a whole bunch of people in this situation, I believe there was a script, and it was scripting that was going on here. And then Donald will also touch on how he did his research from I don't believe these guys to I think they're political prisoners. And if he believes they're political prisoners, then this is a politically motivated agenda or script or narrative. Because like Betty said, in the disclosure, there's nothing that is an admission of anything. And also Donald can touch on how the undercover agents had no recordings, Donald or Danny. So apparently they weren't wired.
Well, I keep saying every time this subject comes up, about 10 minutes ago, I think Jason said a sentence beginning with the word A. Can anyone tell me what that sentence was? Exactly what it was? The answer is, without referring to some recording or looking at the video, nobody can tell. And what did Betty say an hour ago? When she talked about a house, what did she say? What was the exact words of that sentence? And nobody can do that. And once I accepted that, and I started with that photo of the firearms laid out on the table, and you can see that in my article at donaldbest.ca and my analysis of it. No police officer would ever, in this situation where we had outstanding suspects purportedly and a conspiracy purportedly and other people directing operations from outside of Coutts, these mysterious people purportedly, when they seized those weapons, they didn't protect them for fingerprints or DNA. And they allowed everyone to know in a press conference the morning of February 14th exactly what they had. And so they staged a PR photo, and that photo was held up and as the reason why the Emergencies Act had to be invoked. And once you accept that the investigation and the evidence collection and this photo were staged for a political event, a political agenda, once you accept that, then we have to stand back and say, well, could everything else have been political? Well, let's go to the denial of bail. Everybody makes bail in Canada. We have an accused person out on bail in Toronto charged with the first-degree murder of a police officer. And he's out on bail. Arsonists out on bail all across the country. Gangbangers, people for attempt murder, shootings, drive-by shootings, they're all out on bail, but not the Coutts Four. And that makes it political to me. So when we talk about the undercover agents who went in, now I've seen a photo of at least one, and that's a good-looking girl. And they didn't send in any old lady. They didn't send any fat old guy in. They sent in some good-looking honeys, just like we used to do when I was undercover as Toronto Police, going in against organized crime. We did a year undercover pretending to be corrupt. We took money. We took vacations. It was all documented. In the end, we arrested everybody, even a few police officers. And that was all done with the oversight of the Crown's office and everything. So we pretended to be corrupt, but we couldn't take their women, and we were always offered women. So we brought our own undercover police officers, and they pretended to be our squad groupies. But once those organized crime members found that they had these women around them, our women, excuse me. Once they saw that, it was an easy next step to gain their trust. And some of those undercover officers, those female officers that we used, were excellent. They'd go over and they'd sit by the target and they'd pour him a beer. They'd probably even give him a little squeeze on the knee underneath the table. You don't think that doesn't happen? So when I heard of the two good-looking girls working undercover in Coutts, Jason said, there must have been some security that they wouldn't have let them come in alone. And you're right, Jason. There would have been other people there watching, maybe truck drivers dressed as truck drivers, maybe real truck drivers. You never know. But they went in and they soon found some marks, and they were looking for something. There was a plan. But the thing of concern is this. They decided to not record the conversations. Now, in these days, an Apple Watch, another little, recorder that people use, it'll go for 4 or 5 days. You even got one that looks like a little RAM stick. That'll record for 4 days. Earrings built into the bras. There's no reason for anyone working undercover to not record the whole thing. Unless you want to make people say things that they might not say. It's called scripting. And anybody who's been a police officer has seen other police officers try to do it. And if you have integrity, you refuse to do that. Oh, I saw that. I saw he had an envelope of powder on the front seat. Well, you saw it wrong, because I saw it come out of a dashboard, a little glove box. Oh, no, it was on the seat. No, it wasn't. And don't start that with me if you want to work with me. And that's what you have to do right up front. You establish yourself as an officer who won't do that, or you establish yourself as an officer who will look the other way. It's so common. So when I heard these girls went in undercover, and that their statements, whatever was said to them, or whatever they say was said to them, were the basis for the warrants, and the warrants were the basis for the Emergency Act to take down this country all across the country. So whatever was said, or they say was said, led to the Emergencies Act and the taking down of homes and families and jobs, bank accounts right across this country. So the politicians needed Coutts. They needed firearms. And by gosh, what a coincidence. That's exactly what they got.
Yeah. And Rick, since you were last here, we've now had a week of pre-trial motions and arguments. And really two big things happened during that week. One was the argument for the CC1 application. We'll call that the secret envelope or the sealed envelope portion of this matter. And then on Friday, we had an RCMP officer, Kevin, I can't get his last name. If he paid me, I couldn't get his last name. But he was the silver commander during all of this. So Danny, they had gold, silver, bronze command structure. And he was the silver command structure person for most of the time. So he testified. And what we got out of him on Friday was a lot of very interesting pieces of information that we didn't have before. One of them was starting as early as February 9th, they were searching out guns and trying to find guns. And they had intelligence, so he said, that a religious group, a local church, may be stockpiling, caching weapons. We also heard from him on the 11th and 12th. They were searching semis looking for guns. They didn't find any. On the 13th, they also searched another semi, didn't find anything. And then on the 13th is when they started to arrest people. We have testimony from this officer that, according to them, Chris Lysick, who was walking around in the crowd, by the way, he was live streaming, so we actually know what he said. But what the testimony was, that Chris looked at one of the officer's guns, said something like, "That's a nice gun. I want to take it." That was the testimony. The video shows that Chris says, "That's a nice gun. I wish I had one." A little bit more jealous, but certainly not action. And then that's what he was arrested for uttering a threat, and he's still charged for that, uttering a threat. He was the first one picked up at 9:30 on the 13th p.m. 50 minutes later, it's Tony. Tony was still walking the crowd. He was videotaping as well. He was recording the police officers that were surrounding him coming in. Little did he know those were his arresting officers, but he did, film them and post that. My understanding is he was aware of the Chris Lysick arrest, didn't run away, didn't go find guns, didn't do anything, just continued to walk the crowd and film the officers. And he was arrested about 9:50 p.m. They executed the search warrant in Coutts on a property that had 2 trailers on it. Chris Carbert was in one of the trailers. Again, Chris Carbert heard about Lysick's and Tony's arrest. He didn't run. He didn't do anything. He wasn't feeling good that night. He fell asleep. They came and knocked on the door, had ordered him out. We heard about how it was a level 4 tactical. They were in full riot gear. They were using the bullhorn. This all came out on Friday. Ordered him out, arrested him about 12:30 in the morning on the 14th. And then later in the day, Danny, we're trying to work this timeline out because the next part of the timeline is very confusing. But it looks like the RCMP came out with their press conference announcing the arrest of many people. They didn't say 4, they said many people. And they also announced the arrest of the 4th gentleman, Jerry, 3 hours outside of Coutts near Calgary on his way to work. But the press conference announced that they picked up another person, and they said he was headed towards Coutts with guns. That's we found out later that's certainly not true. Then he was also picked up. I'm not sure about the timeline on this one, so we'll leave Jerry to the side. But I do know that Chris Lysick and at least and Betty, correct me if I'm wrong, were then later charged with conspiracy to commit murder. Chris Carbert was picked up on mischief at first, and so was Tony. But yes. Chris Lysick was picked up on uttering a threat. And then I'm not really sure about the Jerry side, whether he was charged immediately or not, because his arrest came later. But the 3, relatively close period of time arrests, none of them were conspiracy to commit murder. Those were later. Also on the timeline, Danny, that we found out that the announcement of the inaction, the EA was enacted, came at the same time or actually before the gentlemen were charged with conspiracy to commit murder. So we also know that the EA was talked about on the 12th. This came out of the POEC. So the EA was talked about on the 12th. In Coutts, they're searching for guns. As you just spoke about in Ottawa, there's a rumor about a big truck full of guns. All of a sudden, like you said, maybe they took the bait. Maybe they didn't have to. But anyways, Coutts had the gun picture come out, and then the EA, and then the rest is pretty much history. So we found that out, that there was a church group that they were suspected of having a cache of guns, and then that massaged to something else later, or no group, or something like that. The RCMP officer, when she gave the press conference, did say there's leadership outside of Alberta. This is a large nationwide group. It's a very, very big concern. No arrests, no names, no nothings to this day of anybody else associated with this that were leaders or anything like that. That hasn't happened. There's been none of that has happened at all. And then, Rick, one of the last things was, we'll get into the CC1 application. So the CC1 application, and Danny, you may have heard this as the sealed envelope or the secret envelope. What's going on there is, back in June 12th, when this was supposed to start, they got a big cache of documents given to them, the defense. The defense recognized some stuff was missing. Application for disclosure, arguments about that. Crown then dumped another bunch of documents onto the defense, which I believe were the scribe notes and some of the notes around the scribes for the RCMP. Inside of that, there was an unintended disclosure of some, and I'm told it's 4 sentences. We don't even know what the sentences say, but 4 sentences were discovered, which caused the defense to create the application called the CC1, so Criminal Code 1 application, which has an instruction to the judge. So the application is asking the judge to pierce the client solicitor privilege to take a look at these 4 sentences, because the defense claims these sentences create crime fraud. Crime fraud is a legal term. It's not just 2 things that are put together. It's an actual legal term, which means a lawyer has facilitated through legal advice the commission of a crime. Usually it's attributed to defense. Usually defense has these kind of allegations against them, not to the Crown. And as a result of this, so the conditions that have been created here, the Crown, inadvertent disclosure, defense calling it crime fraud. They contacted the Law Society of Alberta, worked with them on a process of inadvertent disclosure of client solicitor privilege. There's a whole process on how to handle that. And that includes putting it into a sealed envelope, destroying other copies of it, bringing it to the court's attention, providing it to the other party, in this case, the Crown. And then the arguments were for to convince the judge to go ahead and pierce that veil, take a look at this information, and then act upon it. This hasn't happened in Canada, so there's no situation where there was case law for this. So a good chunk of the week was arguing civil case law, loosely connected criminal case law, but it was quickly identified that this will be new case law. So on Thursday, the judge said, okay, I need to take my time to review this. He made lots of comments that goes both ways, like, what if this is nothing and the defense is wrong, all the way to this could be something that ends not just careers, but the claim itself, the case itself. So we don't know really where the judge stands on that. But he's really working on making his decision. At the end of Thursday, he made it clear that the decision will be reserved. He will not be providing his decision the next day. And then he set up the next day to be the interview with that RCMP officer. And what we do know, and Betty shared a little bit more information here for Chris Carbert directly, but the next scheduled court date for all the men is November 1st. The judge said he can open up that envelope all the way to the beginning of trial, which would be May 2024. The Crown asked him to open up the envelope after trial, so whenever that would be. Right, Betty? The Crown was asking for that. And then, of course, the judge did say November 1st. No, he said I could open it up to trial, but likely a lot sooner. So at least he put that indicator out that we hopefully will get a decision on whether or not he'll pierce that veil. So that's the situation that happened during that week. We got the arguments in from Crown and defense on that CC1 application, and they've rested that. The decision is pending. And then we started on the And again, this is for a motion for disclosure, not trial. So this officer was there to talk about the scribe notes and all the stuff around that. While he was giving that testimony, we got some more information, like the church was the first, they suspected that a Cashier gun coming out of a church, and they were searching semis for guns, didn't find any. And then seems like, as Donald would say, a script happened after that point. And I can't really say much more about the guns. We don't know whose are whose, but we certainly looked at that picture and saw that a lot of them are very legal and allowed. And that's about it on that. Do you have any questions? First, I'm going to start with Rick, because we gave you that summary before. Now you've gotten some new information. And have you come up with any information while you've been watching this for the last 3 weeks or so?
I'm going back to what I said the first time. And Donald's already said it today. Everybody gets bail in Canada. That there's questions about this more and more. This is why I'm getting more concerned about it. Why are they not getting bail? If there's any questions surrounding it, usually bail would be given, if there's any doubt at all. And I'm talking about crimes that Donald's already spoken to, or murderers, arsonists, rapists. If there's question around any of their cases, they get bail. So that's where I'm at with this too. I'm as agnostic, I think, as Danny and Donald probably are. There better be something juicy, just like I said last time, for these folks to be charged with these crimes. And that'll have to come out in a trial. But until then, the concern for me is why they're still in jail. And why is this not being overturned today? Let them out, and if they're going to maintain the charges, great. But in the meantime, from what I've seen in 25 years of policing, this is now disgusting that these fellas are still behind bars while waiting for a trial.
Absolutely. And
better word I can use, I think. It's shameful that these guys are still in jail. That said, if they get bail and if they're convicted, I'm also on the other side that obviously I think people need to be held to account for their crimes. And so I'm riding the fence solidly on this still. The difference is that the more that comes out, the more disgusting it is that I can see that these guys are being held until trial.
Yeah, and keep that position, of course. We have lots of support, but the best type of help around here are the ones that are going to keep an open mind and take a look at it critically. So, Betty, I'm going to throw it to you in a second because I want to get this bail conversation correct. So my understanding is Chris Lysak was the first one to apply. I think all the men were trying to at the same time, but Chris Lysak was the first one to go up. He had a package for his bail hearing, which he wanted the judge to open and read. The judge didn't open or read it, put it down on the table and said, I'm not giving you bail. And then, Betty, you can correct me or not, but at that point, none of the men continued with the bail hearings for this judge. Is that correct?
Yeah, he got a bail hearing really early because he wanted to get bail and go directly to trial. And yeah, you're right. He was denied it. They wouldn't even look at anything. I think they just assumed he was guilty, so he wasn't going to let him out. So
yeah, the quote was along the lines, I would never give you bail or someone like you bail, something along those lines.
Yes,
right.
Yes, yeah.
And then, that indicates they have a narrative for sure.
Yeah, and then the other guys waited until they felt that their lawyer could be prepared better. But in ultimate, my Chris's lawyer did a horrendous job. Something definitely was up because he didn't do what he supposedly was good at. So Chris was denied bail because they said he was a danger to the public and to the police. And ultimately, in the end, the other two were denied bail for the same reasons.
Right. Now, there was another application not too long ago where they went through the whole thing. They filed, got the date, went spoke in front of the judge, and then that judge says, you need to go speak to the original judge.
That's
which is
right.
the one who wouldn't even open the package. So the second hearing was punted to the original judge who didn't even open the package. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, that's not for Chris anyhow. Chris's judge did open it.
Okay, so this will be for
So
Lysick then?
that would be for Lysak only.
Okay.
The guys had different judges. Two of them had the same, and the other two, I do believe, had different judges. So, yeah. So when Chris goes back again, he has to go in front of the original judge because the second judge said that he couldn't find reasons any different than the first judge, that look any different from the first judge. So he just deferred to her, said, go see her again.
Right.
And
Now, Chris may have, or he does have another one in October. So there's another bail hearing for Chris in October.
yes. Yeah. And I'm hoping that the secret envelope is open by then. Because that'll
Absolutely.
give them a really good reason for bail. But I'd like to bring something forward to the all UX policemen that I found very interesting with some of this conversation is these undercover women were with the guys and bringing up stuff about guns and everything. And they were convinced, supposedly, that these guys were on their way to pick up a hockey bag full of guns. Okay. And apparently the undercovers were told to get out of the situation for their own safety, which I found a little odd, that if they truly felt these guns were coming in, should not somebody have followed them just to, just in case it was true and for everybody else's safety too. But apparently they just let them go. And where these guns were coming in were right at the checkpoint at Milk River, where everything was being checked. You couldn't just come in with a hockey bag full of guns. But they did say that they saw a backpack given. Apparently it was full of clothes, but that's all that they actually saw given anybody from a distance. But I would just be curious what people think of the fact that they were told to withdraw, and because for their own safety, and nobody supposedly went with them for all these weapons that were supposed to come in that they never did find. So I'm curious about that, and the fact that when they were showing Chris a picture of all the guns that Jason talked about were so neatly set up, they said, these were all found in your trailer. And you watch Chris's eyes in this video. He says, those weren't in my trailer. So I just wanted to share that too. But mostly, why would they just leave these men alone if they suspected this hockey bag of guns were coming in? Any answers?
And I want to just add to that, they also got an immediate emergency warrant, imminent danger type of warrants, right, where they're saying it's happening right away, but this is over like a 3-day period too.
Yeah,
so
they
Danny,
said it
maybe
was imminent, and it was 4 days later that they did this.
right. So not really imminent. That's not the definition of imminent. So Danny, did you have some questions and maybe tackle the question from Betty?
Well, I'm not an undercover operator or an undercover expert. My only real involvement with undercover operations was providing tactical support, like a covert overwatch for operators that were in high risk scenarios before. That might have been pretty difficult if they were in a large group of people, like at Coutts. I think Donald would probably be a better person to answer the undercover operator tactics. One question that I do have actually for Donald is, I know you talked about the recording devices, and I know that there's been a lot of progress made in recording devices that are a lot more discreet, but is it standard practice to be recorded? Because I know other UC operations I was involved in, much lower stakes up in the north. Not that I was directly involved in, but I was like privy to the investigation. Quite often the operator would make all of his notes after the fact without a recording. And that was to avoid being like searched by the suspect for a recording device.
Okay.
Okay, well, you're right there, and in this way, first of all, it sure depends on who you're going up against, and it also depends upon the circumstances and such. Way back in 1978, when I first got into undercover work, we had a Nagra, which was the size of a paperback. It was cast aluminum, reel to reel. It weighed about 3.5 pounds, and they taped that to the inside of your thigh. And then they ran a microphone up to your chest. So every undercover operator in the world had shaved legs and a shaved chest. But they would always go for your crotch. And, if you're in a position where you're working with organized crime or a hostage situation or anything like that, you're going to be shaken down. You're going to be searched. But now, come on. There's an Apple Watch. How many people in the room had an Apple Watch? That'll record for 10 hours. That's great. There's all sorts of devices. So if you really want the truth and the accurate truth, and do we really think that these girls were going to be strip searched? And even if they were, everybody has an Apple Watch anyway. So no, I don't think that was a valid reason for not having a pair of earrings that are recorders, or wearing an Apple Watch or a Fitbit or something, or having a pen. There's all sorts of things. And I always used 2 devices because, as forensic people know, if you record the same conversation with 2 different devices, neither can be changed. It's just an impossibility. So undercover operatives do that because, as I say, it's, they're nothing now. I mean, there's a paperclip. There's a recording device, right? So, which is a keychain or a car fob. So my answer definitively is no, that wasn't a reason for them to not record it. Now look at that police officer who arrested, it was one of the Chris's, I think, for threatening the police. He said that he was going to take his firearm, purported. Which one was that again?
Lysick.
Lysick, okay. But we know, because we have a recording of that officer lied. That officer scripted that conversation, scripted it. And I know you guys know what that means. He changed the words to words that best suited an arrest and conviction. He lied. He made his notes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So he had an agenda, and he lied. Now, the girls that were undercover, as I keep saying, I can't remember what I said 5 minutes ago. When I was undercover, I would carry a golfing pencil. And if someone said something that was absolutely vital, I would excuse myself. I would go to the washroom, sit on the toilet, write it down in toilet paper, what he said, and then shove that in my sock and go back out and complete the rest of the conversation with the date and the time on that. Why? Because that's real. That's accurate. That's evidence. Mm-hmm. But no, they didn't do that. And yet, from whatever words those operators said, purported, that were said to them, in whatever context, they could have made it up. I mean, they needed this. The government needed this. So, okay, That's what I think. But let's look at the charge here. We have 4 men, and believe me, it's taken me a long time to get here, of analysis and looking for evidence and looking for faults like that scripting. So we have 4 men here. There's 7 children between them, and a couple of mother-in-laws, and they have businesses. Some of them had up to 7 or 8 employees. One of them, I think. They have homes, trucks, no criminal records. I think somebody got into a fight when they were a juvenile. That's it. 2 of them knew each other. I can't even remember which ones. Doesn't matter.
Chris and Chris.
Okay. They knew each other. But we basically had, except for those 2 that knew each other, we had 4 Canadians coming together who had no prior real meeting with each other, coming together at this protest. And they're asking us to believe, the government, the police are asking us to believe that 4 men with 7 children, businesses, no records, roots in the community, church, school, and one of the guys raised his son on his own since the son was 10 months old. Holy smokes. Wow. And we're asked to believe that, surrounded by 50 police officers or 100, they got together, sat down and said, "Hi, my name's this, my name's that. Yeah, let's murder us some police officers. Why, yes, that's a fine idea. Let's plot to do that." Huh? Does that sound real? Because that's what they're asking us to believe.
Wow. And the second half of Betty's, Donald, that was powerful. The second half of Betty's question was, according to the informants, they said they witnessed a bag of guns, duffel bag guns, whatever we want to call it, being transferred at a checkpoint and then let them go. Like Betty was saying, they didn't arrest them then. They didn't go follow them or keep a closer eye on them. We just let them go and dealt with it a little bit later. Now, Rick, if you were doing an investigation, you had evidence or information or intelligence telling you there's a bag of guns there. Is your first instinct to just let it drive away and go somewhere else? Is that what you really thought?
I'm the same as Danny. Most of my experience has been around operations. And so I've been outside of the UC work. But once we start going down that rabbit hole of would we take the guns immediately or would we let them go for other investigative purposes, that's like I say, that's a rabbit hole. Both
Fair
scenarios are viable. Absolutely. Sometimes if we believe there's an imminent threat, you want to get those guns right now. If you're looking for further investigative evidence, sometimes we'll let those guns go. It does happen with the hopes of getting better evidence and obviously an expectation that there's going to be no imminent violence. So that's a rabbit hole that I can't get into because they're both viable.
Fair enough.
This is conjecture though, but I've been meaning to say this. It's awkward when friends and family start talking smack. I call it smack talk, and we hear it all the time. People will insinuate that how the heck are some of these politicians still alive? And I tell them, are you crazy? They're listening to these phones right now, jokingly. And then I'll say, okay, A, that's a human being that you're talking about. Their life is sacred. We don't talk like that. And then secondly, you will not further the cause of proper political discourse by hurting them. You'll end up with martyring some of these politicians that we don't agree with. So everybody nodded. We hear people talking smack like this all the time. So that's my worry with this is that if you put in a good-looking undercover and then you get these guys talking smack, of course it happens. And I'll give you one quick war story here. Before my tactical days, I did do quite a bit of drug work. It was in the at the turn of the century, where ecstasy was the new drug, and we didn't really know what it was as cops, to be honest. And we'd send in a good-looking undercover, and we were really just at the front end of this investigation. We didn't even know what this drug was. Well, we charged this one young fellow with trafficking after he sold ecstasy to this undercover. Pre-trial, defense is there, I'm there, the Crown's there, and they always do these bartering prior to the trials. And this didn't happen at the trial. This happened outside the court. And the defense lawyer said to me, Rick, if that girl came up to you and asked for ecstasy, you'd say, wait here, I'll find some. I had to admit, you're right. And so they pled off this charge. I can't remember what happened, but I had to agree with them. I said, absolutely. Wait right here. I'll be right back. She was that beautiful. And so it was a form of entrapment. So these things do happen. And so those two stories are related. I can say operationally, we've seen where that happens. And this young guy wasn't a drug dealer. I admitted to the defense, no, he's not a drug dealer. He was this young kid in a club scene that probably did what 99% of the world would.
For sure. Okay, Paula, go ahead. Get the boys ready. I just got a message from my wife. That's cool, Paula. Go ahead. Okay, so Danny, I saw you nodding as well. And Rick, thank you so much for giving me your honest truth there. Like they could let it go. It depends on the operation. Maybe they're collecting more information and stuff like that. So Betty, I hope you got your answer there. That is not completely abnormal. And it depends on the situation. But now I'm going to go to Danny, because Danny started to sniff out and got information that they were trying to plant guns in Ottawa. And then when something happened out in Alberta around the same time, you thought, oh my gosh, somebody took the bait. Can you kind of expand on why you were saying those kind of words, planting in Ottawa and bait in Alberta?
Well, so like Rick kind of alluded to, people talk a big game a lot when they think they're in a safe setting, and they say things that they don't necessarily, that they would never actually necessarily act on. And I mean, people have said all kinds of things to me, even pre-COVID, about like my position and my role and my proximity to certain people, right? And opportunities that could have been missed, so to speak. And it's always done in kind of a jesty way, but I'm always similar. I'm like, you got to be careful with what you say, right? Like, because the wrong person hears you say that, or the wrong person takes it out of context, and you could get yourself in trouble. But especially when you may be attempting to impress somebody. And I mean, like, the RCMP has been criticized multiple times because of undercover techniques that they've used in the past. You know, a couple of the most, couple recent examples, or the one that where they were really lambasted by a Supreme Court justice in BC, was involving the couple that were accused of plotting to plant pressure cooker bombs around the Victoria Legislature for Canada Day. And initially there was a conviction, and then the Supreme Court overruled it and really, really hammered the RCMP for entrapment tactics, according to that judge. And when you read into that a little bit further, like, these were very marginalized people, according to the media reporting anyway, that has suffered from drug addiction and were probably pretty hopeless in life. And I think what a lot of people might not understand is that during the height of the COVID mandates and the hysteria that was being created by our government and our media, and the dehumanization that was taking place, journalists advocating for unvaccinated people to be put in camps, and people wishing other people would die. I know friends who had employers that said that all the unvaccinated should be lined up and shot in the back of the head. That mentality was festering, and it was growing in Canada. And even people like myself, in my darkest day, coming from the tactical policing world, knowing how they operate intimately, I actually had kind of letting my mind wander about like, how bad could this get? I actually had the thought in my own head, am I going to have to face off against some of my old colleagues one day if they come to take my family? And I kind of caught myself and I was like, oh my God, like, am I really thinking this? Like, what are we living in right now? But if I was able to slip into that thought process, imagine how desperate other people were feeling who have no inner knowledge of how policing operates, right? And you get into your group, you know, and then we can be guilty of the group think also, right? Where you start to be like, you really start to concoct worst case scenario. And so you start to feel that act of desperation. Like I'm kind of speculating here, but visualizing the single dad, right? And he's thinking like, what am I going to do if they come for me and my son, right? Like he has no one else, right? Like I can understand people feeling hopeless and desperate and possibly being enticed into something that they could see as a potential desperate a solution, because they feel like they can't do anything, and now all of a sudden someone offers them an opportunity where maybe they can do something to make a difference. People are willing to sacrifice themselves for that. And I know, I think one example I can use that I see a lot in the freedom movement is people being sucked into like the common law, sovereign citizen type ideology. And I've seen how that does not work in the Canadian court system, ever. And yet people still are gravitating towards it because they feel desperate. They can't trust the police. They can't trust the courts. They can't trust the politicians or the media. They've lost faith in a lot of their social network because people turn their backs on them, and they're desperate for something that they can do that could potentially be a solution. And so, I mean, that's a bit of a long-winded rant, but my fear is that, people are being targeted because they're in a desperate situation and they're feeling desperate, and they may be willing, or they may have said things that could put them in jeopardy out of that feeling of desperation. And like I said, I was there. I was seriously worried. I was contingent before the Freedom Convoy in Ottawa. I was contingency planning on what I was going to do, how I was going to get my family out of Ottawa, the Ottawa area, if they started to round people up and put us in camps, where I would go first as like a little temporary measure, and then how I was going to get out of Canada. Like that was my planning process. And these are people, I'm thinking about people that were like brothers to me beforehand. You know what I mean? So the desperation was real. People were legitimately afraid that their kids were going to be forcibly vaccinated against their wishes. And people were legitimately afraid that they were going to be incarcerated in voluntary quarantine camps.
That we saw in Australia.
Australia, China. And I mean, Australia and Canada were pretty similar countries. And
we were just 6 weeks behind them, but what they were doing and what we were doing.
And I still think that we were headed that direction if the convoy hadn't spooled up and put the pressure on the provinces to start backing down on mandates, which eventually resulted in the federal government doing the same because they realized that they'd pushed too far. But if that had never happened, I think it would have got worse.
Mm-hmm. And let me add a piece to this, because I got this from Chris either yesterday or the day before. So of course they were wiretapped their phones. They had all their text messages. They know everything these gentlemen are saying for a period of time. Betty, you'll confirm this. There's no disclosure provided from the Crown that says here's a text message that says they're planning and doing all that kind of stuff. Now, what Chris Lysak told me was what does exist is several text messages about him planning to leave, go take care of his kids the next day. He was going to go do some things. He was planning to leave away. He was going to go and leave Coutts and get back to his life for a bit, maybe come back the next week, and that kind of mentality. And Betty, let me know, I think your son was also planning, that was his last night. He had other plans for the next day and stuff like that. So from my conversation with Lysick, he's like, look, I said nothing that would have made me be here. In fact, I said a bunch of things that would indicate I'm not sticking around. I'm leaving. I'm making plans for the rest of the week. Betty, is that your understanding of what Chris was doing as well?
Yes, both Chris's were leaving the next day. They had been away from their kids too long, even though their kids came every weekend to spend the time with them. Eh? But they just said, we've done our share. We're going to go home now. So that is, yeah, exactly what happened. And like Chris said in the letter that he wrote, but tomorrow never came.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So Donald, oh yeah, go ahead, Danny.
I just have one comment as well. To what Rick was speaking about earlier about the two options both being viable. I mean, my experience is only within the RCMP in that regard. But I know like the RCMP definitely has a reputation for being more risk averse than maybe other police services. And so the only scenario I could think of when you guys were talking about whether they would intercept the guns right away or possibly let them go, the only reason that I could think of why RCMP investigators would let that go if they legitimately felt there was an imminent risk was if they were rendered inert as part of an operation. Does that make sense? Like as part of an undercover operation? If they were inert firearms, if they were unusable.
I can speak to that because I've done it. Okay. Sometimes we'll get a warrant to defunk a firearm, so render it inoperable. So I've gone in and I've ruined a firing pin on a pistol that was owned by a bad guy with the idea of preventing it being used. And even to this day, we get into the big gray area of ethics there. And I'm the first to say it's a big world of ethics, but Danny is right. We have defunct firearms so that they can't be used, and then let the gun go for further evidence gathering.
Right. So because you had the knowledge, it was no longer dangerous, so you're not leaving the public in danger. And Donald, you're nodding your head a lot on this one.
Absolutely. But look at Coutts. If we really believe that the police believed that these guns and they would have had ammunition with them. So if they really believed that a bag of guns and or ammunition was coming in an investigation where they're talking about conspiracy to commit murder, where there are hundreds of people, to me, and you talk about the RCMP being risk adverse, anybody would be risk adverse to let operational weapons go into a situation like that. If I were the operation commander, there's no way I would allow operational weapons to get in there into a situation like that if we really believed that there was conspiracy to murder going on. I mean, Rick, Danny, if you were an operational manager at the scene and you had to make that call, I'm not letting in a bag of firearms and ammunition. I'm not going to do it, because what if something happens? It's all on me.
Yeah.
So that's my thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something I've also personally experienced was getting activated to do an emergency takedown of a subject of like a large scale complex investigation, which ended up basically jeopardizing that investigation. They activated us to do like an immediate tactical takedown because on the wire they received information that suspect was talking about going to commit a murder. And so that was a separate incident unrelated to the investigation. And just because there was the possibility that suspect was going to go do that, they activated ERT right away, and we had to do a hasty takedown. So I don't know. In my experience, the RCMP, well, if they were faced with a scenario where they had legitimate intelligence about a bag of guns, they would have acted right away. And the thought that the conspirators would try and bring something like that through a primary checkpoint is ridiculous. That would be the worst conspiracy ever.
And they never
Don't
found
don't
dead
forget,
guns.
this is 2 years after the mass murder in Nova Scotia.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And think of what the RCMP were accused of there, the neglect of duty and knowing and not and allowing things to happen. No way the operational commander would allow a bag of guns to go into that situation. Do you agree with me, gentlemen?
Unless
Yes.
they knew something that we don't.
Yeah, well,
Right.
exactly. Like
There
we talked
Fair
about
enough.
already.
could be more where they actually didn't suspect that those firearms were going to be used imminently. So that's what I mean about going down these rabbit holes of operational. We don't know, but for sure, on one hand, to let a bag of guns go into an area that could be used against not only police but civilians, not likely you'd let that go unless you knew something that we don't.
Like they were
Fair
not
enough.
operational, maybe. I mean, I don't know. Have we ever heard any evidence that these guns were made non-operational?
No.
I haven't heard
Yeah.
anything like that. So, but
No.
that
They
was a
never
darn good
found any
point.
guns. They never did find these guns. They figure somehow they hid them somewhere before Milk River, but they never did find guns. They also claim that they had hundreds and hundreds of guns and tens of thousands of rounds of ammunition, but they're not sure where that stuff is.
Correct.
never-
That
You
came
know,
out on.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Donald.
Well, I just wanted to go someplace, and we talk about the police now. Look, people who were police officers 30 and 40 years ago, like myself, we know there's been a profound shift in the perception and the actions of ordinary police officers on the street. Now, a lot of that is just different generations and things change, and I'm aware of that. But I think that during the COVID, we had something that was just almost unbelievable. We had the police changed overnight, tossed the rule of law out the window, toss Peel's rules of being of policing. You know, the police are the community, and the community are the police. They've been going this way for a long time, but during COVID, they just tossed that out the window, and they became de facto armed enforcers of political policy. And we can talk about police chiefs kneeling with Black Lives Matter during illegal marches and allowing Black Lives Matter and other people to create mischief and tear down statues and deface them and everything. And then after that, they allowed Walmart to be open. They allowed all sorts of places to be open, but not Adamson's barbecue sandwiches in Etobicoke. So they sent the police in there. All of these things are very disturbing to the population, even if they can't put it into words. They know that the police have become a political force to enforce political concepts and ideas and policies. And nowhere did I see this better. And gentlemen, I'm talking to Danny and I'm talking to Rick here. We had police across Canada arresting visibly pregnant women in front of their screaming, terrified children. I'm talking women 7, 8 months pregnant. And for the egregious offenses of maybe pushing their child on a swing in a closed park, watching hockey, while unvaccinated, taking their son to hockey while unvaccinated, or walking down the street without a face mask in the open air in Quebec City, visibly pregnant women. And they handcuffed these women behind their backs. Now, guys, you went to police college a little after I did. But it was like lesson one was, if somebody's your prisoner, you're responsible for them. And lesson two was, unless a pregnant woman has committed a murder, you never put handcuffs on a pregnant woman, let alone behind her back. What if she falls? What if the child is harmed? I mean, that's just the way it was.
Mhm.
And these men handcuffed mothers, pregnant, visibly pregnant women behind their backs for nothing. You tell me, guys, because you know you've been police officers very recently. What's up with that? How could officers bring themselves to do that? I mean, had anyone done that on my squad, I'd be getting set to fire them. I really would, bring them up on charges. How was it that we had that happen in the last couple of years? Police officers handcuffing pregnant women behind their backs for nothing. Please, I want to hear the answer.
I don't know, Donald, and that was part of the most disturbing aspects of the last couple of years for me too. Was I was like, what happened overnight? When did cops stop using discretion and common sense, and when did we start enforcing things that weren't crimes? You know,
Exactly.
like we were. Hayes, I'm speaking right now, bud. Sorry about that, but
Oh, good.
you know, like I know the videos you're talking about, seeing the mother drug out of the hockey rink. She was even wearing a mask, being the pregnant mom being drug out of the hockey rink, and you know, the young kid getting tackled on the ice rink because he was committing the crime of playing hockey on a pond with some friends. And you know, there's obviously many more stories, but I'm just thinking, like, what is going on? Like, you know, when we're busy, we don't even respond to break and enters unless they're in progress. Like, what are we doing enforcing this nonsense? And the only thing I can really think of is that, like, people bought into the propaganda, including police, but which still boggles my mind, because hardly any police officer I've ever spoken to in person thinks that this government or our media is trustworthy. And yet people bought the narrative. So I don't have an explanation, but it's definitely what differentiated me from some of my peers around me. And I was like, don't you guys see what's happening? Like, I feel like I'm losing my mind, and are myself and only a couple of my colleagues the only ones that see what's happening here?
And let me actually go to Rick now, because Rick, you took the vax, you made your decision, you did what you did, but you also told us a story about shame rooms. Do you want to kind of update Danny on what you're talking about there?
Yeah. Fully 1/3 of the police officers I worked with lost their minds. And they fell for the narrative. And it's embarrassing to them to this day. This is not a show. This is an entire study that needs to be done still, Jason. And we're not supposed to bring up the Holocaust, but at the Holocaust Museum, I think it's in New York, there's an entire section of it dedicated to law enforcement. What happened to the police then? Why did they shirk their duties in the 1930s? There's a book written that I'm hesitant to read because it sounds really nasty. It's called Ordinary Men. It's how police officers in Germany went from investigating thefts in your community to executing Jews. And it didn't happen overnight. It was a slippery slope, but it was Danny and me. It was our colleagues that were police officers there. So this is a study that's got to be done. The short answer is nothing's changed, I guess I can say. Somebody put it to me that police are actually rule followers. Don't forget that. We're stringent on our hiring, that we hire only people who are rule followers. And I'm the first to say I was never a rule follower. And folks that I grew up with used to joke, "What? Rick Abbott became a cop? Really?" Meaning I had lived. But back to your point about the shame room, this is another good example of how police officers are no different than the rest of the public. Edmonton had a policy where if members were tested every 3 days on a rapid test, they could come to work on their own time, on their own bill. And so as a watch commander, there'd be 60 people working in the division that I was responsible for. And I could guess that 6 of them at a time were unvaccinated, not because they disclosed openly to their squad mates, but they'd have to go eat in a different room. They were allowed to go arrest bad guys together. They were allowed to share a police car together. But when they came back to the division, they weren't allowed to eat together. So they went and ate in a boardroom that was actually set up for the superintendent. And the vaccinated started calling it the shame room. So you go to the shame room to eat. This was another one of my red pill moments. I said I wouldn't get into the pills again, Jason.
I know. We'll stay away from the pills.
This was one of my red pills. This was not about health. Clearly, this was about shaming the people that I worked for. And that was one of my lines in the sand. I will not shame the people that I work for. A third, I put everything into thirds. I call it the tactical rule of thirds. A third love it, a third are agnostic, and a third hate it. But the third that hated it, they did not like shaming their fellow employees. And they'd go eat with them in the shame room. Or they'd take their lunch and heat it up for them. So there were people who were on side, but they wouldn't speak out against it. So here we are. There's a study to be done on what happened to law enforcement during these government dictates. And I'm apologizing on behalf of all in law enforcement here to the rest of Canada that our police officers fell for it.
Sorry, Rick,
Yeah.
but we ain't buying. The damage is done. I've seen what the police will do now, and so have you guys. So I think the reputation and the public confidence in the police is pretty well gone now. There's a lot of reasons, and it was a long time happening. And then all of a sudden during COVID, it's like everything else, how you go bankrupt, slowly, and then all of a sudden. And that's what happened here. I don't see how we're going to rebuild the trust of the community and the police. I don't see it.
Well,
We know that they're just political thugs for the government when the government says so. They've proven that to us. Sorry.
Well, I'm going to step in there and say, Danny, you, and Rick are examples of how we can rebuild that trust. Hearing from police officers, ex or current, maybe some whistleblowers, maybe some things will change in the next little bit. Maybe
look what
Alberta.
They did to Danny, and look what they did to Rick, though. Okay.
I understand. Yeah.
And look what they did to Helen Bruce in Ottawa. Okay. She wouldn't get vaccinated. She wouldn't get vaccinated. So they wiretapped her and her phone, and her family's phone, rather. They wiretapped her and the family because she wouldn't be vaccinated, and she was pushing back on the narrative.
No, fair enough. And you're not wrong, because that skepticism is earned now, and our resentment is also earned right now. But I still have lots of hope that this can be repaired, because I believe it was some bad apples. I believe some people just followed. And for the most part, with the third, we have 2/3 that could still be good. I'm hopeful. Danny, I suspect your kids are up now. We got to hear one of them, and you might want to kind of start wrapping up. So are there more questions that you may have that you want to kind of flesh out?
Well, I don't know about questions. I want to know so badly what's in that sealed envelope.
Yes.
And I know you guys are, and even just what's can't be said because of the publication ban, but a couple of observations that I'm kind of formulating in my head is that, when they were talking about nationwide group outside leadership, to me right away that it seems like they're trying to paint the Diagolon Jeremy McKenzie picture, right? Which the government definitely has used and the media has used to try and label the convoy as a danger of insurrection, which I don't believe for a second. I absolutely believe it was a meme, like Jeremy says it was. And there just so happened to be a couple of connections to Chris Lysek, like with the photograph and like because they had met at that barbecue. But I mean, you see that. I saw that, you know, when you talk about the Fifth Estate episode that aired during and about the convoy, you know, they didn't talk to me or even attempt to. They didn't attempt to talk to Tamara or anybody else that I'm aware of, but they honed right in on Pat King and Jeremy McKenzie because they were trying to make those two guys fit the narrative of what they wanted the convoy to represent.
Yep.
And so those two have been the punching bag for the media and the government. And they are the target to try and paint the freedom movement as dangerous. And then I think, like Donald was mentioning, I'm conflicted. You know, I still have a brother in the force who I know is a good person and a good member. I do have supporters that are still working. But I don't know how widespread that is. And I don't know how many people even care or pay attention to what Danny Bulford has to say within the RCMP. I do think, though, like the force is as a whole, like the leadership, the senior management of the RCMP is 100% politically captured, in my opinion. I mean, I don't think there's a doubt about that. And we've seen a series of commissioners be, you know, scandal after scandal has come out involving them, allegations of political interference, allegations of corruption of some sort. And then they just resign and fade off into the distant memory of people and get some cushy job with Interpol or the UN or something like that. So there isn't really any accountability there either. And, you know, pre-charter, pre the formulation of CSIS, when the RCMP was the Security and Intelligence Service of Canada as well, in the early 70s, they were involved in some pretty shady stuff, you know, like planting bombs, burning down a barn, and planting cases of dynamite, intelligence operations trying to implicate the FLQ and or link people to the FLQ. And just out of curiosity, I looked, and sure enough, who was the prime minister then? Pierre Elliott Trudeau. No surprise. So, I mean, that's just a little tidbit I found interesting. So, I mean, like, I know that these agencies, you know, like CSIS and the RCMP are under much more civilian oversight than they were back then. And, you know, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms came into effect after that. But based on what we saw the last few years, where the charter was completely thrown out the window, due diligence by police managers was completely thrown out the window, there definitely appears to be a willingness of the, I won't call it leadership, I'll call it the management of these organizations, to not only throw their own people under the bus, but act against the best interest of Canadians in service of their own future career or political aspirations. That's my
And I just want to touch on one thing so that we don't leave it on the record. Danny, there's two narratives. So there's the media-based one that you're talking about, where Diagolon's brought up a lot. And then there's the court one where Diagolon's not brought up. So the disclosure and stuff, the court is not talking about Diagolon at all. The only testimony we've heard so far is around a religious group that was local. So the press has run with that narrative wholeheartedly. Even the alt press has been running with that narrative, but that's not even before the court right now, from my understanding. Betty, you want to correct that? Jeremy's not in the disclosure. Diagolon, I think, was mentioned once or something like that, I was told, but that's it. That's not the internal narrative, is it?
It's not. Diagolon, they said something about they found a patch.
Yeah, I think that's the only reference to Diagolon in the disclosure is to the patch, but they're not even saying that Diagolon was the leadership or anything like that at this stage.
No,
Just the
they
press.
said they figured that the guys were were a small part of a huge organization, and they thought maybe some guns were coming in from the NRC. That's the
NRC.
Netherlands Reformed Church.
Right. So the disclosure and the information in court is around NRC, Netherlands, what'd you call it?
Reformed
Church. Okay.
Mhm.
So, and the only reference to dialogue is the patches. So Danny, as you're seeing here, there's two narratives, the public court and then the actual court that we're dealing with here.
Well, that was exactly what we saw at the public inquiry as well, right? Last November, you know, the police, the OPP, the RCMP, even OPS to a degree, and CSIS testified clearly that the justification to meet the Emergencies Act was not satisfied. And so Jody Thomas, the National Security Advisor to the PM, who has no intelligence law enforcement background that I'm aware of, created her own open source intelligence unit. And
right.
Again, it doesn't seem like real evidence seems to matter right now with our political regime. It's all about the court of public opinion. And that's all that they care about controlling. That's all they care about manipulating. That's how I see it.
Right. And one thing I can let you guys know is Alta Media was there. I'm staying away from naming names because there's lots of confusion around that as well. Lots of issues around that. But there was Alta Media there on Monday, Tuesday, and that Alta Media was probing the audience, family members, pulling them aside, continuing with the dialogue question, asking family members if dialogue was real. Just want to highlight one thing, and Betty can certainly talk to this. Very early, Chris Lysek's father, Mike Lysek, was accosted almost, from what I understand. Basically, the media walked right past the 11-year-old daughter, went straight to Mike to ask him a bunch of questions in her home, and then twisted that into Mike. He didn't, but this is what they made it sound like, that he was confirming that his son was part of some sort of radical group. And then from that, Mike has had PTSD, he's had lots of anxiety and a complete distrust of the media to the point where he doesn't talk to media at all. This was about to happen again with another family member, a different man, a different parent. But the Alta Media was still there on Tuesday saying, please confirm that this is real. Donald, you've investigated this as well. Other than the patches, are you finding any other side of open source? By the way, that was a new term we learned during the POEC. Open source means social media. They're just getting information from social media. Have you seen any other connections?
No, there's none. As a matter of fact, I've seen evidence that there's none, and that came from the RCMP, didn't it? Because if they really believed that there was this nefarious network out there, and they were directing operations at Coutts, each one of those firearms that they purportedly seized would have been bagged individually, photographed at the scene, carefully bagged by someone wearing gloves, so that they could do DNA tests and fingerprints on it to see if it was touched by someone else. It may have led to this network. But no, when it came time, they displayed those firearms, touching each other, contaminating, cross-contamination, with the RCMP car in behind to say, hey, look what we did. Aren't we great? And they laid it all out with the rifles precariously balanced against the table. So if anyone hit the table, they'd fall over. It was a propaganda photograph. And within an hour, it was being used to invoke the Emergencies Act. So all I'm saying is, at that point, the RCMP didn't even believe their own scripted, narrative. They didn't believe it because they didn't follow up on the investigation. Here we are a year and a half later. Anyone else charged for directing the operations? Nah. And They've tapped everybody. Of course they have. Nothing. So no, there's no big evil directing organization and an evil mind directing it. was simply created, I believe, as part of the narrative. They needed it to invoke the Emergencies Act, and here they are, and there's no evidence of it.
Yeah, Emergency Act, Bill C-21, other stuff since then have been pointed at that one photo. In fact, the entire argument during the invocation of the Emergencies Act in the House was centered around this as well. And in fact, they even went a little bit further by making comments like honk honk means HH, which means we have all heard that video. Very, very weird to see in the House. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap up because we all do have to get back to work and get back to our days. But Danny, I'm going to come to you next and see if you have any other comments or if there's anything else that you wanted to find out before we wrap up.
Rick mentioned the book Ordinary Men. I read that book prior to all of this happening, and as part of Jordan Peterson's recommended books. And I remember like thinking in my own mind, like, oh my God, if I ever saw something like that happening, I hope I would at least be strong enough to resist the transformation from regular Joe to an ordinary man to a cold-blooded executioner. And with my skill set, I would hope that I would actually be part of the resistance. Those were thoughts that I had prior to all of this occurring. And, at the end of that book, they do talk about some of the people that were involved. They were interviewed after, and overwhelmingly the case, their rationale for why they went along with it is because they didn't want to let their comrades down, or they didn't want to let they felt like they had to do it to be a part of the group. And only like a very, very, very small percentage ever refused to participate in the executions, even though they were threatened and beaten and ridiculed. So the power of the groupthink or mass formation, whatever you want to refer to it as, it can't be underestimated. Yeah.
Yeah, and Rick, you saw that, right, with the shame room. So maybe the ordinary people is the study that you said we need. You said we're going to need to study this and go through it. Ordinary people might have already been that study. Maybe just repeated it.
I'm with you on that. I think it's been done. We're just reliving it. So that's why it's important that when things are going bad, so when we're scared, when we're under time constraints, and we think people are going to get hurt, we should go by our standard operating procedures. I'll reiterate it. We need politicians with a bold leadership to do just that. They could have abided by our Charter of Rights and Freedoms and pointed to the wall where they're posted in their offices and say, we don't know what's going on here, so we're going to abide by those Charter of Rights and Freedoms until we do know what's going on. Mm-hmm. The police could have done the same thing, but we didn't. So anyway, it's another rabbit hole that needs to be studied. The only other thing I'll add here, Jason, is thank you for continuing your investigations and your tenacity to keep this up. I'm loosely following you, and I think it's important that Canadians see the work that you're doing. You've raised enough questions for me now that I'm 100% on the side that these fellas should not be in remand. They should be out with their families until they get a trial. And I want to give you credit for bringing me to that point. You and Donald have done a great job of bringing this to Canadians, and I think more should be listening. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And I do want to make sure that other people are recognized. So Granny Mackay, she is really the one who brought me to the table here. She's been the one that's been putting her wings around these men for a long time. And she's never going to give up. That woman is going to die with these men around her arms around them. So I want to say a shout out to Granny as well. Without her, I don't even think we'd be talking today right now, Rick. I also want to shout out to the rest of the family. So Tessie and Mike and Jacqueline, you guys are crushing it. You guys are dealing with things that we are just being empathetic about, but you're doing it for real. Go check out one of my episodes, Rick, with Jacqueline's story, because there's a story within this story. They went after the wife of and made her life hell as well. You may not know this, but she was charged as well. She stood up a lot stronger than most, and that might have been her saving grace, but we could have had a Coutts 5 because Jacqueline was also wrapped up in this as well. So check out my episode. It's Mark Jacqueline's story. You'll see that. And then one more episode I want to point you guys to is yesterday's episode, medical attention. I called it medical attention because these guys aren't getting it. They're struggling with their health as well. One of them is in rough shape. And Chris Carbert is really the one that's doing the best, but all three of the other men definitely have some ailments and need some attention. So we had Dr. Chris Shoemaker on yesterday to help give us some practical diet-based advice to assist these men. Unfortunately, I did speak to Tony yesterday, asking him whether or not he can get lemon for the lemon water, which is one of the things that the doctor recommended. The answer is no. They don't have lemons in the canteen. And he said the only way to get items added to the canteen is after a riot, because they are demanding something to be put onto the canteen, or you can try the old system, but it can take years. So the chances of him getting oil of oregano, getting lemon for lemon water, and getting Greek yogurt unsweetened, and pharmacy grade vitamin C. These are the four things the doctor suggested that Chris gets, or Tony gets very quickly. Spoke to Tony yesterday. He doesn't have access to any of those. So medical attention is a problem in the Remand Center, probably everywhere. And of course, Jacqueline's story is hell within the hell, and she's still living it right now. So there's a little bit more to this even than the four men that we're covering here. So I did want to make sure that Granny and Jacqueline and Tess and Mike and the rest of the friends and family are also recognized in that as well.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then, Betty, you want to kind of wrap up, or we got to get back to work? And I'm sure these gentlemen need to get some things done too.
Yes. No, I want to thank all of you, all four of you men, for being here, listening. And I hope that after everybody listens to the four of you and what you have said today, they have a better understanding of things. But I, for sure, and I know Chris too, appreciate it. And I will be eternally grateful to all of you for anything you do and perhaps will do in the future for us. Thanks.
Absolutely. But this is not over. And I let people know, I've been working on this for about a week and a half now. We have about 50 political prisoners in Canada, various stages of charges, various stages of interaction with the government. But we're identifying, Rick and Danny, a bunch of people who were charged, debanked, prosecuted, took a deal, still in there, being held, going to be charged. That list is actually growing. Even Tom Marazzo was mentioning that I believe that charges came a year later against him. Spoke to Marco Betty. He's being charged. He's got some stuff to deal with too now. So the definition of political prisoners, I'm going to stretch it a little bit to include people who are being persecuted, so political persecutions. And there's at least 50 of them, 30 in Windsor alone that people aren't talking about. So for the last week and a half or so, I've been trying to collect names, and I'll be expanding this show to be centered around the Coutts Four. Hopefully they're out on bail soon. But we'll also be addressing a lot more political prisoners across Canada as well. So stay tuned for that. And if you know anybody, Danny and Rick, that should be on that list, reach out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it to Rick. You can maybe say goodbye, and hopefully we'll see you again soon, Rick.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. We appreciate your work again, and I'm watching. Thanks, Jason.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And then Danny, if you want to say goodbye, and then I'll give Donald the last word here.
Yeah, just thank you for inviting me on. Thank you for the work that you're doing to keep attention on this situation. And a big shout out to Granny McKay as well from me. She was a guest of ours during Ottawa. She stayed in our house. So that's how I got to know her. Actually, we might have met on Zoom prior to that, but we became pretty close with her.
Yeah, wonderful lady. Wonderful lady. Yeah. And then Betty, you want to say goodbye, and then I'll give Donald the last word.
Goodbye. Have a great weekend, everyone.
And we might be seeing you next week because I have an appointment to come see Chris on the 10th. Okay. So maybe we'll get together for some dinner or something.
Okay. Sounds good.
And then Donald, you wanted to close?
I do. I want to remind everybody that this show and the people that you see on here, with the exception of the mama, but ex-coppers, we are all pretty grounded people. And I'm going to say, we don't know at this point, because there's been no trial, if each one of the accused is innocent of each one of the charges. And there's some pretty small little charges there. But I really can't get into my mind that they actually conspired to murder police officers. That's just a non-starter with me from what I've seen. Because when political agendas enter into police investigations, justice goes out the window. And we've proven here, I'm really sure we've proven here, that politics played a role in the conduct of the police investigation, in the less than professional handling of the evidence, in the staging and releasing of that propaganda photo on February 14th, and in the denial of bail to the Coutts Four. So the Coutts Four, these men are political prisoners. They deserve their day in court. They deserve justice. But more than that, after 500 and some odd days, they deserve bail. They're not a threat. No way. They deserve bail.
Thank you very much. And we'll be keeping an eye on that for you, Betty. So October, maybe sooner. Maybe we'll get some good news. Maybe that envelope will be open. I would love to just get the information that he opened it. Let's all go to court and understand what's going on now. I would jump in my car immediately and be down there for that. But keep us posted, okay, Betty?
I will for sure.
Okay. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. And we'll be in contact with all of you shortly. Thank you, everybody. So as Granny said, thank you. So as Granny says, there's 4 truths locked away in a remand center in Alberta. The truths aren't being told. And that's absolutely true. We haven't reached trial yet. We also understand that there's agendas and narratives and people are saying what they want to say. And it's out there. We also understand that the court and the media are not necessarily on the same page. There's 2 narratives going on here. It's all very confusing. And that publication ban, the truth ban, isn't helping the situation. I call it a truth ban because the Crown got one last week on the contents of that envelope and the decision on the envelope. It is a temporary one, so it doesn't mean it's permanent. And the judge didn't seal it. So once the envelope is opened, the public, including myself, can go and look at the contents of it, but won't be able to report on it, at least not now. So stick around, stay tuned. Next week, we're going to maybe change things up a bit as we expand the coverage to include a lot more political prisoners, but keeping the main focus on the men. They're definitely the most persecuted ones out of all of Canada, but they're not the only ones being persecuted in Canada. So we'll be tackling that subject as well. And then stick around. This afternoon, I'm going to be on InfoWars War Room with Owen. We're going to be talking about this. We're just going to get into introduction with it. We're just getting started. It looks like Owen and his team wants to bring back people and continue this story. Because even in the States, they care. They care about our people up here. Why? Because Canada is about 10 years ahead of the States. So what's happening here is going to be happening there. So they are very curious. And our press isn't covering it. They're not covering it. That's unfortunate. But there is some new groups getting together. There's going to be a Twitter space, I believe, today. It's going to be hosted by Brett Sears and co-hosted by Natasha Montreal. I think I got her name wrong, but Natasha Montreal. And Granny will be there. Jacqueline will be there. Tom Morazzo will be there. So some good people will be there. So go ahead and check that out and see what's going on there. It's good to see spaces developing, especially on Twitter. Twitter is a great place to get the message out to a lot of people. So looking forward to that. And then all next week, we're going to be continuing with the drumbeat, continue to get the information out. The plan is to have Chris Lysick's family next Friday. So we'll be talking to possibly friends. I don't think Mike is ready yet, but that's fine, Mike. We can talk offline. But thank you all very much. I love you all very much. This is a group effort. We're all working hard. And just like every family, sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's hard. But I do love you all very much. And God bless.